All right, good morning again, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Pinol Viraparia. I'm the president of San Mateo Dental Society this year. Um, welcome to our seminar, Associate to CEO, How Macro Trends Have Changed Dental Practice Acquisition in 2023. A few announcements before we start. Our last GM meeting of the year is on November 16th. Dr. Hesham Emmer is presenting on clear aligners that appeal to GPs. So we're hoping he'll give a good comparison between all different clear aligners on market today. December 2nd, we have a free webinar on navigating the long-term care maze, a seminar for all ages. We hope you will join us for both of those. At the end of our meeting, please fill out the evaluation form. We value your input for planning our programs. All right, now I would like to take some time to introduce our wonderful lineup of speakers. All 5 speakers are SMCDS business members. We appreciate their support throughout the year. So first in the lineup is Ali Oromchian, JD LLM. He's one of the nation's leading legal authorities on topics relevant to dentists. Since its creation, the Dental and Medical Council PC law firm has been regarded as one of the preeminent healthcare law firms developed exclusively to healthcare professionals. His clients seek his advice on dental and medical practice transitions, creation of corporations and partnerships, associate contracts, estate planning, employment law matters, office leasing, and state board defense. Next in the speaker is CJ Williams. He's a vice president of dental financing with Bank of America. He specializes in practice acquisition and real estate. His goal is to align you with a team that can help you find the practice of your dreams. Then we have Forrest Weiderman. He's the VP of Dental Financing in Northern California with Bank of America. He specializes in startups, existing doctor projects, debt consolidations, and commercial real estate. Next, we have Mr. Foad Ahmadi at the back of the room. He's a commercial real estate broker with Rome Commercial Realty. His expert knowledge of market conditions and ability to navigate complicated deals helps Foad guide practice owners at every stage of their career: startups, additional offices, lease negotiations, and building purchases. Last but not the least, we have Michael Dinsio, who is an expert, highly respected dental practice consultant who has helped over 500 doctors start, buy, and grow their practices for almost a decade. With Next Level Consultants, he hopes to expand his efforts so he can motivate and enable even more doctors to thrive and meet their goals. Michael is our newest SMCDS business member. With that, I will give the floor to Ali. Oh, you're starting? Oh.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't ever do well with microphones, so I shake the whole time. But
You're also too loud anyway.
hello on Zoom. Thank you guys for coming out this morning. I know it's a big task to ask you to miss all the college football games that are going on right now at 9 a.m. on a Saturday after a long night of partying probably as well. We're gonna get into a lot here today. Some familiar faces, some not. So I'm going to ask a few questions. Who owns a practice in the room today? 4, okay. And who associates? Who associates private practice? Corporate? No corporate. So we can talk trash about corporate all day.
It's recorded though.
No, but it's a small group, right? We got people on Zoom. So, I mean, it's a small group and we'd like to keep this open discussion. So if we're flying into things that don't make sense, raise your hand. If you want more, then just raise your hand and hopefully we get an open discussion, and I'm sure the other guys would agree with us on that.
Well, and the associates in the room, who is looking for acquisition versus startup? So acquisition, startup.
Oh,
a little bit of both.
cool.
All right.
We'll change your mind. We'll flip flop you. So we'll get right into it, I think.
And we do have one
and we do have one student.
Oh, nice.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, that's big right there.
That's commitment on a Saturday morning.
We love that.
In class all week.
Start early. Start early. Yeah, you get it.
0% for 0 months. There you go.
All right. So we're going to get into a little bit. We're going to talk about the dental landscape and how it's changed. Not just lending, but the marketplace in general. We'll talk about prepping you for financing, what the banks are looking for, student loan debt, and then we'll talk to you about what an ideal candidate looks like to buy or start a practice. But first, Forrest will start with the only commercial we have, but we'll just explain a little bit who we are.
Yes. So who is Bank of America Practice Solutions? So we're the boutique division within Bank of America that only does dental. So even one layer further than that, CJ specializes in the acquisitions and I specialize in startups and projects. So the importance of that is making sure that you have somebody that is in that every single day, because there's so many ins and outs of whether you're starting a practice or you're buying a practice. And that's why today we brought the best experts around that we work with every single day as well, on the real estate side, the legal side, the consulting side. So make sure you ask questions, and this is going to be a very informal day, or formal day today. So we have about 400 associates within our Practice Solutions division. So we've been doing this for about 25 years, and why? Because dentistry is an amazing industry to be in. Dentistry is essentially bulletproof, recession-proof. On about an $8 billion portfolio that we have, our default rate is less than 0.5%. Second lowest default rate in all of small business is dentistry. And if you guys have heard me present before, you probably already know the answer to this. But does anybody know what the number one lowest default rate in all small businesses?
Not just healthcare.
Not just healthcare, all small business. Any guesses? No? Funeral homes. Mortuaries, yes. So
it's kind of lame. He usually has like a $5 bill to give people who guess that. But he came on.
We forgot to stop by the ATM. Send me your Venmo. I'll Venmo you. Go.
It's cool. So let's get into the change of the dental landscape. So right now, banks are offering 100% plus financing. Absolutely, all day, every day. Always trying to do the practice 100%. I always tell people, be prepared to bring about 15% down if you're looking for real estate, as that's a little bit different. Most of you, who owns a home in here? Who owns a home? Everybody feels like, right, you want to own a home, you don't want to pay rent to the man anymore, I got to build equity. But maybe for your first practice, maybe leasing is a little bit better than purchasing, right? It's already hard enough to give you $1 million to buy a practice when you have $500,000 in student loan debt, and now you're 33 years old and you are $2 million in debt, right? So sometimes you just have to analyze the opportunity. Now, the minute you become a practice owner and the minute you have the ability to buy your building, that's the deal we love the most, because real estate is how you will make your money. So for those who own your practice right now and don't own your real estate, look into trying to buy the real estate, because once I start minusing out what you're going to sell your practice for, the rate of return that you're going to end up with is not going to be something you're very happy with. Once you pay taxes, once you pay off your loans, once you pay all the parties involved, whether it's a broker, attorney, CPA, right? You're going to then be left with much of nothing. But guess what happens when you sell your practice? You can still be a landlord for another 5 or 10 years, right? And you can make that residual money. So there's different strategies. So don't get caught up in, I need to own because I can't see myself paying rent. Find the situation, see what's best for you. Rising rate environment, I'm going to table that because we're going to talk about that next. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Forrest.
so, well, and just to add on to the real estate piece that CJ mentioned, especially when you're starting a practice, it is, I would say, especially in the Bay Area, because of how expensive it is, Foad can attest to this, to buy a building, it's really difficult to qualify. So, but when you are an established practice owner, you have history, you have cash flow, and you're able to show the bank that you can now afford to either buy your current building that you're leasing or relocate your practice, that's where down the road, that is the eventual end goal. But when it comes to the project costs, increased project costs, I mean, right now you're probably in the $250 to $350 a square foot to build out a shell dental space. So that's where having industry experts like us that know all the know all the local contractors, I know essentially how to get you to the right people to make it happen, right? Because that's where it can get out of hand. To where, okay, for a startup, I can give you $700,000 for if you're a GP and a specialist, I can give you $750, and especially if 1,500 square feet at what, $300 a square foot? What's the math on that? It's a lot. So that takes up the majority of it, and that's where somebody like Foad is going to be negotiating up front with the landlord certain things, right? Tenant improvement allowance, free rent period, to make sure that we know that we can stay within that 7 to 750 range.
And I think the old ad, if you've been on the market for a while, or some of the people who bought their practices in the past, you go to the brokers and they're like, you go see it on a Saturday morning, right? And like, you better put an offer in because there's 7 other people about to put an offer in on this thing, right? Challenge them on that right now because that's not true. COVID canceled a lot of, you guys are, it's great that the people who don't own are in the room right now because COVID actually canceled a lot of people out of that space. They got told, the banks look for, we'll talk about it later, about 7 to 10% of what you're borrowing in the bank. And that canceled a lot of your peers out because they love to live in the penthouse in San Francisco and they bought themselves a Maserati when they graduated college. And so honestly, unless you're in Walnut Creek, Sunnyvale, or Roseville up in Sacramento, those are the 3 hottest markets by far around here. If a practice goes up for sale in Walnut Creek or Sunnyvale, it's gone. It's gone in a week or 2. It may not even hit market, to be honest with you. So, but if you're in this area, like up in towards, go closer towards the city, even South San Jose, like now you've got a chance. There's some practices out there. What I will tell you though, is when you're buying a practice, you have to take the emotion out of it. And you take the emotion out of it, you analyze the numbers with someone like Mike, a CPA, myself, and because what doesn't lie is the tax return, okay? There's a lot of people in this area who bought their buildings 20 years ago for $300,000. They all know that their buildings are worth $3 million now, and they're just running practices that are, right? But when you go to buy the practice and you want to buy the building too, we're not going to cash flow a $3 million building on a $300,000 practice, right? So you have to understand. I think it's been a seller's market for since probably 2008, 2009, but now I think it's slowly turning into a buyer's market. And you have the ability to poke holes, get a better deal, and make sure that it's what you want. So let's talk about, and then the DSO. Nobody works DSO here, but DSO is not your competition, so don't worry about that. If you get approached by a DSO, I know nobody works there, or the people who own in the room, if you get approached by a DSO, just please, 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 have someone like Ali look over what you're about to sign, because it's not all cupcakes and rainbows. It's a lot of stuff that they hide under and that you just won't look at it. So if you're going to, and if one of these DSOs offers you 17% ownership in 5 years, well, that'll be never. So make sure you're having all those contracts reviewed.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that too. We saw some recent data in the last week or so about the DSO landscape, and believe it or not, it's not as big as you would think. So there's about, I think it was 147 different DSO groups from 10 to upwards of hundreds, Heartland, however many they have. And believe it or not, like I mentioned, or like CJ mentioned, they're not your competition. So that's where understanding, look at the contract, make sure that when you're working at a DSO, like you can learn about how maybe you don't want to do dentistry, right? There's different things that, there are benefits, don't get me wrong, but there's pros and cons to working at a DSO.
Okay, I'm about to go into uncharted banker waters.
I've never seen
Yes.
this. These are new slides, so I can't wait to see what he has to say about this.
So I have mostly known that dental practices sell based on usually the collections or the gross and like percentage of that.
Yep.
But recently a friend was talking to me and said he got an offer from like a, probably not a DSO, but small chains
Yeah.
which are kind of popping up in California.
There's a lot in the Bay Area of, I call it emerging DSOs.
Yeah, so they offer to buy based on the EBITDA numbers, which
Yeah.
I had never heard of.
Yep.
So in your experience, if someone gives an offer, what would be like, how many times of that
Just depends on whether it's a private buyer or a corporate buyer, it all depends on the bottom line. So what you're making, the profitability. So here's the thing. If you're an associate going to buy, don't get discouraged if you lose out to a DSO, because honestly, you just aren't going to be able to match what they're going to match. Okay? Here's since you own, here's a horror story. We were presenting at DS World a couple years ago in Las Vegas, and a guy in Kansas was in the room. It was a DSO conversation, and he was like, you know, my practice does like $2 million. My son's graduating from dental school, and he's like, you know, the bank already told him that they would give him $1.6 million or $1.7 million for it, to buy it from me. But then a DSO came in and offered $5 million. And he's like, well, with that money, I can buy my son 2 practices, you know? And so, but what happened is he had a consultant friend who was also a dentist in Kansas. And he just threw the contract to him, like he should. You should have these 2 guys review those contracts, right? So what it told him was he was going to have to work for 5 years. So, okay, first he was going to get $750,000 at the closing table. If he wanted to buy back into the hygiene department, it was going to cost him $350,000. Okay? And then from there, he'd have to work 5 years producing at the same clip that he's producing now, and then he might get up to $5 million. So what the DSO's hope there is that 3 years into it, you go, this is ridiculous. I wanted to retire. And then you walk out, and he probably gets less than what his son could have qualified for a bank loan for. So 2 things there. Associates, don't get discouraged if you lose out. Sometimes they're just DSO opportunities, and that's just what they are. You know them, you've seen them. If you lose out, it's not your fault. That's just the way it goes.
Just come to a startup.
A bank has to do 75 to 85% of collections, and I hate saying that number because if it's in Sunnyvale, Walnut Creek, it's probably closer to 90% of collections is what they're selling for. You have to understand that just natural attrition, Mike, probably going to be 5 to 10%. Like the bank is protecting themselves, and that's why we only lend that 90% number, right? That's why we only like to stay there, because we like some equity for when patients ultimately walk out the door and don't come back. The DSO they're bankrolling other things. And dentistry, honestly, is losing it, is not yet. Your vet friends have lost it, right? Your medical friends, you don't go to my guy was Dr. Adams and his dad and his grandpa. We don't go to that family clinic anymore, right? Medical, there's a good one. Do you know who the largest owner of veterinary hospitals is in the United States? Mars Candy Bars. So they're hedging other business, okay? So
like, what?
So they're hedging other businesses. That's why they can bankroll and do that extra, because they know you're bulletproof, like Forrest said. They know what the default rate is. They know, but they also have their money and their feet and so many other things.
Like chocolate.
Yeah, like chocolate. And that's like their most profitable wing right now is the clinics.
Have you heard of VCA? That's Mars.
That's Mars. VCA is Mars. You know why they love it too? Because they own, when you went in to get your dog blood tested, it cost you $800 to do that. Mars owns that as well. And then when they recommend the dog food you go to buy, they own that company as well. So
it's a monopoly.
It's a monopoly. Okay, this is Uncharted Banker Waters. Honestly, I asked like 25 of my peers, has anyone talked about interest rate in presentations? And they're all like, you're an idiot. No. Interest rates are wild right now, but I'll tell you why they're not that bad. Okay, so when we lend, so you walk into Best Buy, you want to buy a TV, you apply for financing, they run your credit score, and that's what they base your rate off of in your payment, right? When you come to a bank to buy a dental practice, we base our rates off of what's called the 10-year treasury. Okay, so the 10-year treasury ebbs and flows. That is what essentially the Fed is lending us the money to, which then we have to lend on top of that, right, to make our money. Because unfortunately, we're a for-profit business. So we have to make the money back and then some, right? So I'm going to give you 3 snapshots. Here's the 10-year treasury. The 6-month look, we call it the T-bill. 6-month look, where's it headed? May, June, July, it's going up, right? Came down a little bit too. Here's a recent memory look. So this time last year, we kind of came down a little bit, We're still trending up, though, okay? Most of you have heard the 3% term thrown around. Oh, 3%, loans at 2%, loans at 3%. We were living in a fantasy land, okay? When I started this 11 years ago, rates were 6.5%. You know what they are today? 6.5%. We're probably back to normal. And here's what I'll call it. For some of you in the room, I'm calling it the since you were born look. Here's the since you were born. So I was born right here, right in between here, okay? Since you were born. But look where we are compared to 1984. So we're not down. We are rising. It's a rising rate environment. But the ultimate reality is you're not even close to where it was. Now listen, we're going into an election year. They're likely not going to fiddle with much coming into next year because people want to have jobs come November. So it's probably going to stay at that stagnant 6 to 7% range. But what I'm here to tell you right now, the since you were born look, if you're waiting for interest rates to go down, you're missing the boat. Yes, you heard 3%. This was really cool. I could sell anything in this time frame because it had a 1 in front of it at one point. But now it's got a 6 in front of it, and you've all heard that, and that's what you're thinking. But if you take away anything from today is just understand that we're just back to level. It's just back to level. Yeah. A bit, dentistry is the low default rate. It's bulletproof, right? We've told you that 5 times this morning already. What you have to know is small business as a whole is not. Like the restaurant default rate is ridiculous. And unfortunately, you guys get lumped into all of that, which is why small business has to protect itself because not everybody's as great as this industry. But we're nowhere close to the top. Does that make sense?
Anybody have any questions on this? Because, think about it. Most of you probably have a mentor in here, right? Ask your mentor what their interest rate was when they bought their practice or started up. 16%, 18% I've heard before. So what I'll say to that too, just to add on, is you date the rate, you marry the investment. So what do I mean by that? So if you are an associate and you're looking to start up or buy, and as CJ mentioned, you're waiting for rates to go down, guess what? Rates might go down in the future, but if you find the practice of your dreams or the space of your dreams, and you're worried about the interest rate versus the investment that you are putting yourself into, you're going to be making so much more money that you're not going to care about that interest rate. So don't let the interest rate scare you right now.
Cool. Moving on. You want to misconceptions. We can just go through it real quick. We already talked about DSOs. They don't own the landscape. This is the biggest one that when we walk in, so like at CDA, we do 2 sets of presentations every year. One on Thursday is a seller seminar, and one on Saturday is a buyer seminar. It's going to happen in Anaheim again, just so you guys are aware. But you wouldn't believe it. In the seller seminar, there's always 50 people. In the buyer seminar, there's always 50 people. So the older folks don't think you guys can qualify. But reality is you can. Everybody always goes, what's your student loan debt? They're like, oh. And I'm like, trust me, I've heard worse, whatever you're about to tell me. Right? But it's doing it the smart way, buying a practice that can handle your lifestyle and your cash flow. But just know that it's so funny because we did the mixer at the, forget where that was, at the grill over last year. And I remember it was a young dentist mixer, but I remember like 3 or 4 owners in there just handing out business cards.
Like, you want to buy my practice? You want to buy my practice? You want to buy my practice?
Here's the tip. If you're trying to buy your practice, do you know who the first person you should go to is?
Your
Talk
boss.
to your boss. Because so many people in these seller seminars are like, they're the boss of the people that are there on Saturday, and the first person they don't ask is their employer. Listen, you're in an industry that breeds the want for you to be successful elsewhere, right? It's very weird because in veterinary, it's not like that. They expect you to stay forever and take over. Like, they don't want you to go be associates elsewhere. Kind of weird. But in dental, it is absolutely, they are encouraging you to do that. So I think the first now, unless your boss is like 35 and they're probably not retiring now, that's a little different. But if I would say the first person you need to talk to if you think your boss is on the sunset of their career is them. Because maybe it's not an opportunity to buy right now. Maybe it's an opportunity to buy 40% or 50%. Right? That's one thing that they always go straight to the broker, straight to this. But what the easiest transition we do is the associate buying the practice. Why? You know the people, you know the process, you know the philosophy, and it's not some Joe Schmo walking off the street trying to change the culture and fire all the people and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, so also just to add on to that, so the DSOs owning the dental landscape. So what DSOs are doing right now, and you might have seen this recently, is they're coming into schools and they're having conversations and they're scaring the heck out of the associates, or the students, I guess. Especially they're targeting the female doctor. They're saying, hey, come work for us. You can be a mom. You can raise your family. We'll give you vacation. And then on top of that too, you come out of school with $300,000, $400,000, maybe $500,000 of student loan debt, and they're telling you you can't go get a loan to start your practice. That is not true. As long as you take care, which we'll talk about the specifics, but as long as you take care of yourself personally, you come out, I'll give you $700,000 to start your own practice. He'll give you however much depending on the qualifications of the business and you. We're going to give you that money because we know you're going to be successful.
The ADA only updates their stats every 4 years, it feels like. But that was the number in 2021 of private practice ownership. So still the lion's share. Still the lion's share is still private practice.
Yeah, so specialty lenders. So there's really, when you're starting up or buying a practice, please talk to a bank that's dental specific. So the way that we look at and the way that we underwrite buying or starting a practice is different, right? So when you're starting up a practice from scratch, we do it based off of projections, right? Obviously, there's no history of owning a practice, nothing along those lines. So we've been doing this 25 years and we have expectations for the first 4 years. So we're projecting, as long as, like I mentioned, you take care of yourself personally, that's where I'm going to be able to get you an approval. But on the practice acquisition side, it's well, it's not totally, completely specific on the practice, but it's more heavily specific on the practice that you are buying. Because at the end of the day, the bank only cares about typically the first page of the tax return. CJ always jokes that there's no brokers in the room, so I can say this, but the brokers put these 90-page packets together and he usually just throws them in the trash, right? Because all we're looking at is the cash flow of the practice.
And buying a practice is not like buying a home, right? When you bought your house, they're like, here's $1 million, go find yourself a house. And you went and looked at 10 houses and you finally bought one. I could approve you for $1 million practice. I could decline you for a $400,000 practice because it doesn't make sense. So just because you qualify doesn't always mean the practice will qualify, which goes back to my point of take emotion out of it. It's the practice you grew up in. It's 5 minutes from your house. It's the dream scenario, but it's not run well. And I'm not going to stick you in there. Like, our default rate 0.33. Why is that so? Because that just shows that you don't fail, and more selfishly, it's like we're not going to put ourselves in a bad position either, right? So that's where you can go is the specialty lenders. There's 5 or 6 of us out there. The local banks are what you tend to see sometimes where they know our success, right? And so they're like, oh, DDS or DMD behind your name, perfect. You're a great candidate, but they don't analyze anything. I always say we'll do about $2 billion across the country this year. And our next closest competition does like $500 million. So if we're saying no, you should ask yourself why. Because we're proving more people than anybody else out there. So just make sure. And then the old adage of the seller financing, sometimes that's necessary depending, like around here you get a lot of partnerships on buildings that like have 5 or 6 owners, really tough for a bank to finance. But if it's a practice acquisition, first off, for people on the back end of their career, don't do that. Why put the liability on yourself when there's people out here doing this? I know there's probably a tax reason or somebody told you skipping out on that seller financing will make your tax bill go away. You're going to have to pay the piper at some point. And that's reality. I would never put that, even though, oh, you guys are great though. And I would never, to the buyer or to the younger folks, I would be like, don't do that because that seller has every right to charge you 10% because they're taking all the liability on you. So at least get that evaluated. And if somebody brings up seller financing, you should probably ask why they're doing that. There might be something funky with whatever it may be, but just be careful. And
yeah, on the startup side, it almost is a little bit more like finding a home and going to just buy your house, go find a house. So going through the approval process, it's all, like I said, as long as you check about 5 boxes, these ones right here, I'll get you an approval and I'll say, perfect. You have a rent limitation of X. Talk to Foad, let's go find your practice. Let's make sure it's the right space or the right fit for what your vision is for the practice. So it's a little bit more black and white versus a practice acquisition. So preparing for financing. So this is a really important slide if you're an associate looking to buy. So this is like what I call it used to be the Tesla rule when Teslas were $150,000, but it's the Maserati rule now. So don't come out of school and you're super excited, you got your first job, you're gonna make 150 grand this year. Don't go out and finance a car. Don't go out and get a fancy, expensive car that's $1,200 a month, monthly payment. Don't go buy the expensive house, even though maybe you can qualify for it. Because at the end of the day, the bank is looking at your personal expenses, right? So when you're starting up a practice, I'm looking at your student loan payment and balance. I'm looking at your home, whether you own or rent, and then your car. Between those three, about $6,000 or so or less, which is not too hard to do. So make sure you keep your expenses low. Don't bring on more than you can afford too fast. Work history. If you're a GP, we need at least a year. If you're a specialist, you come out of school. As you walk across the stage and get your diploma, I can give you your keys to the practice. Income, we want about 150-ish. Student loans, good debt. We understand that student loans are part of the process. So, yes, as CJ mentioned, we've seen some pretty high numbers, but don't let it deter you from thinking that you can be an owner. Personal debts, talked about that. So cash savings, this is an important one too. So we do 100% financing, but we want to see about 7 to 10% of what you are borrowing in the bank, liquid. Checking, savings, stocks, bonds, anything non-retirement. So if you're buying $1 million practice, we want probably $70,000 to $100,000 in the bank because that shows us that you are a saver, right? We're looking at, do you spend your money? Do you save your money? Because then that plays into how we look at somebody.
Who tracks their production as an associate right now? Anybody? Yeah? So the bigger the practice gets, the more that's important. And there's a way to phrase that too, right? Like, if you walk up and you've gotten approved and we're like, yeah, but we need to approve your production, and you walk up a couple days before closing and you go to your boss and say, hey, can I get my production? There's gonna be one or two responses, and the first one will be, oh, that's so great. What are you doing, right? Because they did this too, by the way. And the second one is gonna be, door you out, see ya, right? So if we can preface that to them beforehand, hey, I want to make you better, I want to make your practice better, I want to help here. Is there a way that I can keep an eye on my production as we grow our relationship, right? Don't bombard them with, I need my production report at the very end. The bigger the practice gets, the more it's important. Why? Because we want to make sure that you can take over the clinical production when you're buying a practice of what the seller's doing.
CJ,
Yes.
I will say that most of these softwares that you guys are working in, it's really easy to pull a report yourself. It's called Google, just Google it. And then when it comes up, just take pictures and these guys can use it.
Exactly. Yep.
So you don't even have to go to the front office person to get a provider production.
Right.
May I say something? If I see my associate taking screenshots,
Yeah.
that's in my computer,
Yeah.
they're out the door.
No, that's fair.
So I'm not, just as it will.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Don't
No.
take pictures of stuff in the computer.
Good
Yeah.
point.
And then I would say even then too, don't like print it off and take it because that's not yours
Yeah.
technically.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Right.
Just
So
ask for it.
yeah. And that's the thing is like if somebody hits you last minute with that, you're gonna be like, that's kind of messed up. You didn't talk to me about it, right? I mean that's
And most associates work off of a percentage of
some, yeah.
collection.
So, and if you're working on a per diem, they're probably not going to show you the production reports because they're definitely underpaying you. So, just remember that. This is credit score. That was credit score. We don't care. Credit score is what it is. You're never going to understand what the algorithm is, and I still don't.
680 or higher.
680 or higher. Pay your debts. If you have missed, say you moved across town and you forgot to change a credit card bill and you have a 30 or 90 or 60 day late, just explain that. But ultimately, it's always going to say insufficient credit history. So it is what it is. Don't get wrapped up in that because we're a cash flow based lender. So it doesn't necessarily matter as much. Just pay your bills. This is really what the bank cares about. And whether you own and you want to do something else or you're an associate, this is what we care about. Who are you? Are you a saver versus spender, right? Do you blow all your money? Do you buy the lavish things in life? Is that where you are? Collateral. Okay, there are lenders out there, SBA loans, you've probably heard of them. Most of them want your house, your spouse, and your firstborn child to sign on, right? So if they're not if they're securing your loan with anything other than you and the business, you should be asking yourself questions or asking them questions of why. SBA has some weird rule about an equity in your house, and if there's a dollar amount that it is, then they require that. So, but SBA should be used for building purchases and larger purchases. And that rate's nasty right now. It's like 10%. So
Variable.
what's it take to close it? So what do I need to close it? And then capacity. This is really what it comes down to. Does your debt support? Does the practice support your personal and business debt? And honestly, some of you have high student loans, and some of you do have a house because maybe your spouse has a great job, and you guys deserve to live in that type of house, right? But ultimately, when the bank looks at you by yourself, if you have a $10,000 mortgage, we're putting that burden all on you. So it may be okay. You're in a community property state. You know what that means? So what's yours is theirs, and what's theirs is yours, whether you sign on the dotted line or not. So bringing someone on to help support the cash flow, it may be a good situation, but you guys are living nice, and maybe their help of their income can help ease the burden in the bank's mind.
And think of it like this. So for every dollar of expense, both on your personal side and the practice side, the practice needs to generate $1.20 of revenue. So that's a good way to think about it.
That's the metric to say you're okay. And then cash. We talked about cash. Cash on hand. Ever since COVID, cash is king. And here's an example. If you have $50,000 in the bank and $500,000 in student loans, right? That's person A. Person B has $450,000 in student loans and $0 in the bank. Who do we like more? Person A. Because we understand the necessary evil is the debt, is the student loan debt that you incurred. But that's the biggest mistake people make, is sinking all that money because they can't stand that high student loan balance, but you took it from $500 to $450 and you have no cash now. That automatically is not great. And then we'll skip past that. You guys understand student
Do you
loan debt.
require these people to bring that cash to B of A for relationship banking?
No.
The only thing we require is a checking account to pull the loan payment.
Business checking account.
Business, we'll set it up virtually, and what that does is that gets your rate discounts and all that stuff. Because if you don't set up an account, then the rate goes inherently way up. But ultimately, personal business, I always say church and state, keep that personal, keep the business. But no, we don't require any full-on banking relationship. Whatever you do with us is totally optional and it'll get presented to you. The only thing that is required is the checking account.
Yeah, but if you do have like a business honors with us, you do get additional rate discounts.
Yeah.
But that's really the only difference there.
Yeah. So if you're a current customer in your business or personal, enroll in Prefer Rewards because that will get you rate discounts in the future. But ultimately, I would say banking's like insurance. It's like if you do it all in one house, you get all the discounts, right? It's like you don't get your insurance through 7 different providers.
Right.
You get it all in one because that's where it becomes cheaper. This is a funny slide for California people because they're like, yeah, 300,000, got it.
That's just one semester.
All right. I already said if you take anything away, take the rate thing away. But actually, if you didn't take that away, take this away. So why should you buy, right? Dental school is not an option. It's for new dentists because student loan debt's so high. Okay, here's associate, okay? Produce $50,000 a month, make $600,000 annually, paid on 30% of collections, 180 grand in income, taxed at 30%, must be living in Oklahoma, and your net's 126. So that's if you're an associate. This slide is why you should buy, right? So we have the same production, same annual. What don't you get paid on as an associate that you get paid on as an owner? The hygiene department, right? So immediately you get a bump in income just because you now get paid on the hygiene department for the GPs in the room. So why you should want to own? Not only because you're going to stop paying the man rent and working for everybody else, but go make your own money. Go make your own money. And ultimately, we're in it for the standard of care. You're in it for your legacy and your vision and history, but don't get jaded that number 3 is you're in it to make some bank for your family, right? So if you do anything, that's why you should own. And then this is the last.
Yeah, I kind of went through all that, but as you can see, like we talked about, it's different buying or starting. Starting up is very black and white. Acquisition is a lot more heavily dependent on the practice. So as long as you take care of yourself personally, just make sure when you have conversations with us, obviously we're not going to put you in a position to fail. Default rate, what do we say, 0.33%? So just make sure having these conversations with us is important up front.
And the reason everybody's in the room today, build your team. You can go to the practice broker. They're not on your team, right? These three guys plus us, plus your CPA, plus whoever else you're bringing in on it is on your team. You have to make sure that you're building that team around you because they do it all day, every day. How many transitions have you done this year, Mike? Across the country? 30? I mean, they're doing it every day, right? So build the team, and that's any questions for us? I have to go to something, but Forrest's going to stick around. There's going to be a panel at the end, so hopefully you guys have questions. So thanks so much for having us. Appreciate you, Nikia and
Thank you.
Jim. Thank you. Mike.
Should I give this to? Just put that on your belt.
Okay. I'll knock it off with all my hand movements. Tough crowd. Let's see here. I don't want to mess this up. It's a very sophisticated system up here. Thank you all for having me. My name's Mike Dinsio with Next Level Consultants. I recognize some faces from the last time I was here, and then I think you as well. So good to see you. The rest of you new, thank you. Jim, Nikia, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being in front of you guys. Okay, so to set the stage, the bank just showed you and explained to you how to get money and the risk factors, and just it doesn't make sense. I'm going to build a little bit on that, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about the mindset that you need to get your head in the game as you head into ownership. Because although the bank definitely can give you loans super easy, that doesn't mean that ownership is easy. You talk to some of the owners in here, it's not easy. It's just not. That being said, it's very doable, but it takes discipline and grit and organization and all the things. And so I applaud you all for being here, because it's a testament to you, and you're building on your skills and you're learning the things today, so that gives you a DNA for ownership. So my agenda today is who we are, because I'm new to the society. A quick State of the Union, not going to get too crazy because the bank did a great job explaining CJ and Forrest, but I'm going to build a little bit on that. And then there's three essential things that I feel like are instrumental whether you buy or start. Leadership, labor costs today is a big issue, and then patient growth or marketing. So whether you're going to do a startup or you're going to buy, these are the three things that my head would be in the game with if you're thinking ownership. And they're all hard, by the way. A lot of the clinical stuff you guys got. But these things are going to be really important. So a little bit about us. We've been around since 2018, actually even a little older than that, but fairly new organization, but we've had a lot of success because we're doing some cool things. We help about 70 nationwide, so we're a national consulting firm. But we're heavy here because of the partners in this room and the society. About 30 docs we help get into ownership. I'd say half of those are startups, half of them are acquisitions. And we have a whole program to walk you through to help you buy or start. And I actually have some flyers in the waiting room there that describe the program. I really didn't want today to be about me selling the program. So I'd love if you grabbed those, because it explains exactly what we do and how we help docs get into ownership. And a side note, we do, which isn't listed here, we do credentialing. So if you didn't get me as a consultant buying or startup, if you're going to get into network, we can do that as a side off, a one-off, okay? Our team's pretty robust, and I highlight this because I think this is unique for consulting firms, that I know what I know, but I was never clinical. And Paula was clinical, but she wasn't business. And so our whole philosophy is really having a brain trust of consultants that if a practice had an issue with hygiene, that we could bring Paula in. If a practice had an issue with front, we would bring Stefani in. If practice really wanted to get into profitability and marketing, I would lead that charge. So too many consultants, I feel like, act like they know everything, and I definitely don't know everything. And so we've kind of collectively attacked, or that's how we approach every client. We do practice management, buyer rep, startup. We have hygiene programs and front office programs. A little bit about me. I founded the company. I got a master's in business. I went to Ohio State. Go Bucks. I think they're about to kick off literally right now against Penn State. It's being recorded. IO. Before I got into banking, I used to actually do what CJ and Forrest do many moons ago. But before that, I worked for a marketing company and did a lot of marketing, and that was what I studied in school at Ohio State, which was a really great background because the Limited Brands is out of Columbus, Ohio. Not a lot of people know that. And back in the day when I was going to school, it was all about, Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie and some of these like really, really solid brands, Bath and Body Works. And they were like really instrumental on how I learned how marketing worked. And so I'm going to get into some of that stuff because it applies today. So brokered a couple practices. It's not what I do, but I did it because I wanted to understand the other side to be a better buyer's rep. So I have that experience as well. I would challenge anybody that doesn't own to check out my podcast. There's two of them, one that specializes in acquisitions and one that specializes or focuses on startups. And it's, if you just go to dentalunscripted.com, you'll see both of those. And I'm an AGA approved speaker. So maybe this is why you might consider listening to me. That's really, that's it. I hate this slide, but we got to get through it. So quick State of the Union. Because the bank kind of went through it already, I won't bore you to death. Dentistry is still an excellent industry. It's been rated and ranked at the top because of the recession, quote unquote, proof. I would argue that we might be in a soft recession right now, but I'm not concerned, and there's things happening every single day at our organization. B of A is financing tons of deals. I bet you Ali's busier than ever. So it's kind of like this weird like news saying we're heading into this really dark time, but at the same time, bank's funding a lot of deals, I'm doing a lot of deals, Ali's doing a lot of deals. So that's a tribute to how well the dental industry is, and you guys can still make a great living for yourselves, even in quote unquote harder times. Private practices are not failing. Those guys talked about it. And again, banks are lending easily. They were just talking about all those qualifications. It's actually not too hard to hit those qualifications. To get $1 million loan is actually very easy. And I'm telling you right now, even during COVID, when the world was just upside down, literally, a lot of banks retracted. Why? Because they weren't sure, right? Right now, they're lending, so they are sure. So we're just trying to debunk a little bit about the environment and the news and all the things. Value practices are holding steady. They're not dropping. In this particular market, CJ touched a little bit, or one of the guys touched a little bit on a buyer's market. I wouldn't go to that extreme, but I would say that it's definitely better than it has been in the last decade, where buyers actually have a chance to push back a little bit on what the sellers are asking for. Ali could probably talk to that too. I did get some statistics in the last 8 months from some CPAs that I trust with data. They are seeing collections up by 7.4% and profit margin up by 4.3% in the last 8 months. I say that because 2022 was actually a really, really hard year profitability-wise, mainly because of labor costs last year. But in the last 8 months, this year has been looking better than last year, which means we're trending up, even though we just came off of this weird kind of like profitability shrinkage. So I'm very happy about that. But it is true. Labor market has stressed every industry, not just dental. So this isn't just a hygiene issue or a dental assistant issue. This is everywhere you go. You see hiring, everywhere. Even in my business, looking for help is very, very challenging. So not just your industry, it's just in general. So why does owning make sense? The guys talked about it. Practice owners can make 5 to 20% more than what they are as an associate. What's weird about that is that the range is so large. Why is that? I want to hear from you now. Why could I make 5% more or 20% more? And the other owners don't jump in. Like, why is the range so much bigger?
Location, rent.
Rent could definitely be a factor for sure. Yep. Any other ideas? Okay, maybe the other owners.
Daily production,
What's that?
your daily production, you product what you.
Better production?
Yes.
I'm thinking more about, yeah, absolutely, sure, yeah. Overhead, controlling overhead, systems, being tighter on things. It's interesting because the DSOs survive because they're really good at systems and tightening things and driving production and negotiating leases, right? And getting supplies maybe a little bit less. They're really good at that. Well, you guys can do that, I promise, with your team and help and being a smart business owner. And so I think dentists today have to be better business owners to maximize 20% like the DSOs. But if you just kind of chill and you just kind of go about being an owner, quote unquote, you will be in that 5%. And that might be debatable whether it makes sense to be an associate versus an owner. So if you're not all in on business, you may just stay as an associate. And that might be the only one today that says that, but it's true.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where does that number come from? Because in my understanding, looking at what the associates make now, what I make in my practice, the numbers are much higher than that if you consider your tax benefits, your depreciation.
As an associate?
No, as an owner.
Sure. Well, all of that factors. But if you're a general dentist making 30% of production, right? Give or take. Are you with me? Or 32, that changes it. But on average, it's 30%. The average practice makes as profit 35%. I've seen as much as 50%. So that's where that's coming from. So if you're an associate making 30% of production, now that's not on hygiene.
Got it. You're basing that number based on an associate working off a percentage.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Versus the overall practice and what it can make. Yeah. I don't know if that's stuck, but I know it's a big range. But the point is where did I go? The point to that is I've seen practices make 50% profit, and I've seen practices make 30%, which is horrible, of the overall practice. So you're almost at the associate. And when you factor in the bank loan, you're making even less. So all of a sudden, an ownership situation doesn't look so great if you're not managing the business. And that's really my point. Okay, so, but the point is it's a very big range if you're not running your business. So obviously I want you to make more than 5% more. Equity, CJ and Forrest talked about that. You get equity when you buy and you grow the practice, you get something to sell in the end. Whereas my company would be very difficult to sell because I'm a consultant and it's hard to sell my brain. You guys get to sell your hygiene departments, your goodwill. It's actually very easy to sell your businesses, even as an oral surgeon, a specialist. It's easier to sell your company, and so therefore you have equity versus not having equity. Just like CJ talked about, or Forrest, real estate. You have equity in something else other than the practice is always a good play. But don't forget, even if your associate money and your ownership money is the same, you've still got equity in the company to sell in the future. So that's a benefit. Freedom to practice how you want, hire the staff you want, attract the patients you want, you, right? And create a better work-life balance. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to create more work-life balance. Because it's really, really hard to do, especially buying a practice. Because when you buy a practice, you can't just go in and change things super quick. But you can change things. You absolutely can. You just got to be a lot more strategic about it and how you need to do it, right? And a lot more prep on the front end before you buy a practice, understanding that business and understanding its weaknesses and strengths, to me is really important, because if you know its strengths, you just let the strengths roll when you own. But if you know the weaknesses and you have a strategy, you have your mind on those weaknesses, and maybe you don't change those in the first 6 months, but you know you got to change that, right? And so being a lot more methodical about that process. But I don't know why I'm going off on that tangent, but yes, owning in practice does make sense, and it can be really great for you. So questions so far about kind of quick State of the Union and DSO position. I thought that was a fascinating kind of topic. I actually represented a client that did sell to DSO, and it made sense for them. I don't think it makes sense for the majority, so we could talk a little bit about that. But anything on State of the Union while we're on that topic? Inflation, I was going to go down that path. I deleted that slide. Labor, we're going to touch a little bit more about that, but no? Okay. Leadership. Well, this is the part of the presentation where consultant starts talking about all those leadership skills and vision and all that good stuff. But it's so, so, so true. Because whether you're a great leader or not, or aspire to be, it's still, it's very important. When you own or business in general, your strengths as a leader will be the differentiator in any company. And so this slide I presented to the San Mateo County Dental Society last time I was here, if you guys remember. And I put it up again even for the associates to become owners. Because when you are in a business, unfortunately I find that practice owners don't share their vision with the team very often. In fact, most owners don't share their vision or where they're heading. There's a lack of sharing to the team in general as owners, established owners or young owners. And I don't know what that's all about. Like maybe that would expose you or a weakness, or maybe there's vulnerability there. I can't figure out why owners don't want to share where you're heading. I tell my team exactly where I want to be in 5 years, and they all know that. And if we fail, that's okay, but they still know what I'm trying to do. And if we don't know where we're trying to go, then how are we going to get there? Because I need my team to help me get there. So again, doesn't that make sense though? Like if you're trying to go somewhere and the team that helps you support you to go there, if they don't know, you're not going to get there. If you do get there, you're going to be like strong, let's go, like it's all on your shoulders, right? And so you have to share that. I highlight this book because I think it's really good. It talks about energy vampires in a business, and almost every single practice that I've coached or have been a part of, there's always one. It's that toxic hygienist, right? Or that toxic billing coordinator, insurance coordinator. I mean, she's stanky, she never wants to come in, I don't know what her problem is, right? And she brings down, or he brings everybody down. And they might be the most valuable player on your team, but you have no idea by eliminating them and replacing, even though that's going to be really hard, the practice will rise. It just will, period. And that happens with startups all the time. It's so funny when I help startups and we get the first team on, and you go through all these interviews, you get all these applicants, and yes, there are applicants, there's people to hire, but you go through all the applicants and you hire that front office person, and in 3 months, I quickly know that person's not going to work. But it's the first hire. It's my client's first hire. And they want to do everything they can to support that person because it's their first hire. They're super excited about it. And then, what do you need? And, oh, it's okay. You can, baby thing, and come in late. It's fine. You just naturally give. And then they get burned. And then you quickly realize you got to fire quick and hire, right? And so I highlight that because on an acquisition, you also, that's a problem, right? So with a startup, you got to quickly make that decision because it's a new team, and bad habits can create really big issues later on, especially in a startup. And every opportunity matters on a startup. Every single opportunity matters. Like every person that walks through We have to be so tight on every single person that walks through. On an acquisition, you got patients hopefully flowing in pretty quickly. So there could be some error there, and it's fine. You're not going to get into any major issues, but a startup is totally different. So again, remove energy vampires, and then know your why. I always suggest Simon Sinek's Know Your Why. Again, cliche consulting stuff, but it's cliche for a reason. So if the team doesn't know why your vision is what it is, that's also a problem. I want to do a $5 million practice and I want to make, $2 million a year. Well, why? The team's just going to think maybe that it's all about money or something. It's not. The why behind what you do. You want to serve the community. You want to do all these great things. You want to invest in more technology. You want to, the why behind where you're heading is equally as important as where you're heading, okay? So understand those two things, great. With the team, even with an acquisition, you have to set expectations super early. I don't care what the seller did. You walk into that and you're the CEO, and yes, you might not have all the answers, but you still have to set the tone and not be afraid to do that. Hey, this is who I am. This is the shop I want to keep. This is what I need from you. What do you need from me? Write it down, agree to that, and then revisit that every 30, 60, 90, or for however long you need to. It sets the expectations. How many of you have kids? Ever manage a kid and not set those expectations? What happens? They just do whatever they're going to do, right? I have 2 of them, 5 and 7. Kind of a really important time to start setting expectations. So I know this very well, and it's the exact same thing with any team, is setting expectations and agreements and coming up with super clear job descriptions. And I know that's very obvious, but it's so amazing how many practices I go into, like the front office, for example, and there's 3 front office people. I'm like, what do you guys all do? I'm like, oh, well, they rattle off all the things. Well, what happens when she's not here? Well, we kind of answer the phones, and we all just kind of help out, is always the answer. And there's no specific who's in charge of what, and when they're not here, what's the protocol, and what's the checklist, how do you know things aren't missing? When you tell somebody exactly what you need them to do, they do it. If you kind of know what you're all supposed to do, which is always the case when I walk into practices, slippage happens, always. So job descriptions and team agreements are super, super important. And then I already mentioned this, performance plans, consistency is key. So that following up process is really important, because once you set the agreements and you set the job description, but then you don't follow through, again, I could tell Charlotte to pick up her toys. That's the expectation. But when she doesn't and I don't say anything, that's the magic. And that's what most people don't do as owners. They all do really great usually about this kind of stuff, especially as a new owner, startup or acquisition. But they're really afraid of hurting somebody's feelings or having an uncomfortable conversation. That's the magic. That's how you get a great team to do things and follow through with what they're going to do. And if they don't follow through, there has to be a conversation, and Ollie can walk you through the HR stuff on if it keeps happening. But again, without the agreements and without the consistency and the performance plans, you're setting yourself up for failure on the HR side, because you need a reason to let people go. So setting it and then following through and documenting it is going to be a life of great HR, and Ali will agree with that. Okay, any questions about the fluff, foo-foo, leadership, vision, the how, the why stuff? Yes, please. Thank you, by the way. This is a quiet group.
What are your thoughts, and can you expand on, nobody wants to work, or it's hard to hire these days, because when it comes to letting people go, because they're going to be that energy vampire, but then not necessarily
Yeah.
if you're going to have a good replacement afterwards.
Heck yeah, that's a great question. So I always say, always be hiring, always be looking for great talent. What most of the practices that I work with do is they put out an ad and they fill it, and then they take down the ad, and they don't save all the good applications, right? And they don't set the expectations, and they don't follow through with accountability. But you do have to always be, in my opinion, recruiting, always looking for great people. So this idea of doing an ad, filling somebody, and then being done with that, whew, found somebody, thank God. Well, there's a really good chance that person's not going to work out. And I think that that process doesn't happen enough. It's going on the offense instead of, or maybe that could be defense, but you get what I'm saying, right? So that's number one. Number two, cross-training is key, right? Number three, we're going to talk about a little bit of outsourcing, because outsourcing is actually really, really working. That's why the DSOs do it. There's no reason why private practice can't do it. So there are some things that you can take out of the practice, and it can be way more effective and efficient. So it depends. If it's hygiene, totally different conversation. If it's front office, it's an easy conversation. Dental assistants, I feel like if you guys put work into developing dental assistants, I always find that doctors are slow to pulling the trigger on an unexperienced DA, right? But to me, take a Saturday like we're doing for however long it takes and build that person up and create a really good DA. And when they have a baby or whatever happens, you gotta do it again. So the training protocols need to be really tight, and there just needs to be a system around developing DAs. I think you guys got that one. Front office, a lot can be outsourced. It's amazing. Hygienist is really the issue. Let's be honest. Hygiene. So that's a really long conversation that we can sidebar on, but everybody's dealing with it, and the solution isn't, well, I'm just going to do my own hygiene. I promise you that's not the solution. You just always have to be looking, and once you get that filled, keep looking for more. And then once you get more, I just had this conversation the other day with a client, and she's actually here locally, and she's got some challenging hygienists. And I said, well, start interviewing, and she's worried about her labor costs. Naturally, if you overhire, your labor goes up. But what's it do when you're overhired or overstaffed? What's it do for you? Does it empower you to set performance goals and hold your team to performance goals, or does it not? It would. So if you're overstaffed, now all of a sudden you can start holding the team to higher standards. You're not so afraid that someone gets let go. So I say for a short period of time, it's okay if the strategy is to elevate your practice to get heavier on labor, because that's an investment. You would think totally different if I said, hey, put $6,000 into this investment, it's going to make you more money or whatever, right? And here's the statistics that you're going to get more money in some mutual fund that Warren Buffett thinks is great. You would be like, okay, investment, that sounds cool. Okay. But you think differently when you have to put $6,000 in a sunk cost on being over higher in wages for a short period of time. The key is it should be in a short period of time. You can't stay, high wages for a long time. Does that make sense? So I think we have to think about that and that whole process. And that kind of tees this up, labor costs. So I'm going to get a little bit deep here, and I want you guys to follow. And will you please raise your hands if this doesn't sink in entirely, because I'm trying to make a point, and it's the first time I've presented it, so it might not come out crystal. All right, so we cool with that? Everybody talks about this, which is a percentage of collections and the profit. Okay, so back to that conversation of 35% profit. This is the average, and this is lower because I'm in the Bay right now. If I was in Ohio, this would be 37%, and the rest would fall into others. So if you added up where all the money goes from all the collections, if I collected $1, 35 cents would go to your pocket, 36 cents to labor, and so on and so forth. Okay? Everybody have seen this. If you haven't, definitely take a picture of it. All the bankers look at this. All the CPAs look at this. But what if I took just profit out, and I had a big pot, and I threw all of the expenses of practice in there only? So forget profit for a second. All of my overhead is in this one big pot. And of these categories, so it's from here to here, is 100% of the pot. You guys tracking? That is what your expenses look like of 100% of the overhead. Now look at what happened to wages. So again, going backwards, this is what everybody talks about, but that's profit sitting in there. If I'm just looking at your expenses, dude, your wages are 56% if you're on average making okay money. I would argue that this is okay money. You're doing a good job. Which expense should we focus on to save some money? Yes, because if you can move the needle just a little bit, then this pie gets bigger. Are you with me so far? I could focus on some of these smaller ones for sure. I could call up Patterson, Shine, whatever, and just beat them up. You might get 1% back. Or I could really focus on this one and make a lot more money. So that's where that range came from, the 5 to 20%, because I could find maybe 5% in this pretty easily, but I can't find 5% of lab. It's impossible. All right, so now we know how dependent profit is to wages and wages is to profit. That's all I was trying to do, right? So how can we do that? How can we control the wages other than, this is a question to you, other than cutting people? Check-in time. Ideas? The obvious reason? More production or more collection, same. Yep. That's the big one. Or there's one other option. You could do the same and yes, and not fire people, but maybe cut days or hours and be more efficient. Or we could drop some insurances and maybe do some more that way. That's a movement. So there's a couple different bars, as I call it, to pull if we're trying to get more profit and trying to control this 56%. So do more. That's what usually everybody tries to do. It feels like a wheel that we're all trying to just produce more and more and more. The owners in the room definitely understand that. It's like, let's bump it to 30% because they need to make more, and then somehow wages rises, right? And you got to do more and more and more and more. But that's not to me sometimes the best way. To me, I like to look at things like production by day and hour and track that, and hopefully that goes up. So especially as a startup, and on those smaller practices that you buy, the fixer-uppers, I call them, the jump starts, the small practices that are like a startup, but are acquisitions, sometimes cutting back to 3 days when you're open 4 days and doing the exact same amount of production in those 3 days is the way to go. Because again, the support team is there no matter if you do $5,000 of production or $3,000 of production. What's going to be more profitable if you're just looking at that day? I have the whole team there ready to take patients in, and we're scheduled for $6,000, versus tomorrow I have the whole team waiting for the patients to come in, and we're scheduled for $2,000. Who's going to make more money that day? So if you start looking at it from that perspective, the more money we can produce, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say sell stuff that you're not supposed to sell clinically. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just simply saying let's really schedule tight, and it is all about scheduling. Back in the day, a mentor of mine, when I was thinking about getting into consulting, she's a consultant, she'd been doing it for 30 years, and I had coffee with her, and I said, what's this game all about, consulting? And she goes, it's all about the schedule, Mike. I had no idea what she was talking about back then. I didn't. Now it's very clear to me. And so those of you in associate roles today, pay attention to the schedule. How are they scheduling you? Are you sitting back watching the Buckeye game while they're prepping something? You know what I mean? You should be moving always. And if you're not, the front office team needs to figure it out. You need to utilize that DA and train that DA so you could become extremely efficient. And that's why I was saying doing your own hygiene does not make sense. Because even if I have to pay $75 an hour, I'm stuck doing pro fees. That will never compete with a $1,500 crown, ever. So even if I broke even on the hygiene column, which would totally suck, you're supposed to make 3 times their wage in hygiene. I'm still freed up to do a couple $1,500 crowns. I just will never compete. So even if you have to take a loss in this really weird time of hygiene and there's this get one that works this day and get one that works that day, and if we can't get one, collapse the schedule that week. Like, it's constantly figuring that puzzle piece out with your team by declaring what your goal is, block schedule the perfect day and hold your team accountable to it. Yes, block schedule. Most people don't. It's hard to incorporate. It's tough. You have to be disciplined to keep it open. You have to get a commitment from your front office team to say, how long are we going to wait before we fill that? Is it 2 days? Is it 3 days? Are you confident you could fill it in 3 days? If she says yes, that's the protocol. Wait that 3rd day and hold it. Because if you find something that week, you can fill it right there, and boom, we hit our goal. So block scheduling is very hard, and you have to be very dedicated to it. Again, back to utilizing and maximizing your hygiene day. I'm not saying make a ton of money off your hygiene. We're not in that world. But I'm saying if you have a hygienist to take care of all those hygiene stays, and you better be restoring a lot, right? Cut if you must. People really need. Oops, sorry, I'm messing with my mic. Cut if you must. I think people are very afraid of cutting. Talk to your team. Or do you guys want more hours? Do you have to have these hours? Like, what's the story with you? Okay, cool. Let's do a skeleton crew on Friday. Cut your hours, because some people want to go home. It's weird. I mean, it's not weird, but they want life balance too. So if you have those conversations with people, it's okay to go to a skeleton crew. It's okay to just have a DA and not a front office person on a Saturday and crush that day and have all of the predeterminations or all the treatment plans set up. All you got to do is swipe the card. Your DA can do that. Nothing wrong with that. Do you see what I'm trying to do here? You don't need all that support, and you can actually be super productive. I gave you some rules of thumb here because I feel like it's an easy way to see if you're heavy in a particular department. So 800 to $1 million, you need about a half or a second front office person. If you're not producing at least 800, you don't need 2 at the front. You just don't. They're telling you you might, but you don't. So in that range, you're going to need about a half, which means you might outsource a biller, which is that other half. Okay? $1 million, you're probably going to need that second and over. Yes, sir.
Is that true for specialty?
No. No. Mr. I can do one procedure and do $1 million in 1 minute. No. GPs have a different game there. So I could calculate some oral surgeon stuff in that rule of thumb. But I would argue, yeah, you could do way more with less in your world. Way more. Okay, need another dentist? Well, I wouldn't even consider it until you hit at least 1.2, 1.5. Wouldn't even consider another dentist. Hygienist, this is a good one. Write that one down. 200 active patients equals 1 day of hygiene. Okay, that'll tell you. And the X factor is a strong perio program. So if you have a strong perio program, you're going to need more than that. If you're doing prophies all day, yeah.
How much is a chair worth?
Great. Like production-wise?
Yeah.
I love that question because at B of A, I had a number and I tracked it on my side, and then I got an accountant to bless this. He and I both agree that about $22,000 to $23,000 per chair per month is the right number per production, not oral surgeon. In production, yeah. So
that's average of
that
hygiene and
everything, yeah. Not hygiene chair. Just as the office, you have five ops, and you're using all 5. If you're only using 3 and you had 2 dormant, it's $22,000 to $23,000 per chair. If you're not at least doing that, you're $12,000 or $15,000, you need to go back to what I was saying here. And it's either cut days, start producing more in those days before you add a chair or add a day. Everybody adds days and chairs, thinking that they're going to do more. It's like, I know I'm a little old, but it's the movie with Kevin Costner, if you build it, they will come. That's not how it works, okay? It's not. Forrest, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add on to that, too. That's kind of when I'm evaluating if the doctor's ready to expand, relocate or whatever, that $20,000 per operatory per month is kind of that.
Is the key for you, too?
So once you eclipse that $20,000 a month, then that shows the bank that you are ready.
That's the right number then. Yep, that's great. I wouldn't even buy a second chair or a fourth chair as a startup. Whoever's doing a startup, don't even consider a third or fourth chair, that next chair, until you've hit that. I don't have time to get into third-party services, but there's billing, there's verification, there's call pickups and scheduling, there's companies that can re-care for you. There's a lot of stuff you can outsource, and you're thinking that it's not personalized. They're actually better than you. It's all they do. Someone that all day gets paid on converting new patients, and that actually is teeing me up for marketing. And I had to speed through up because I'm getting in the weeds here, guys. You had some great questions. But like, who's going to be better? Your front office person, who's probably okay, or someone that's a trained assassin in picking calls up and converting new patients? They're going to be better. That's all they do. So in a lot of ways, and by the way, if you're only billing all day long and you know all the things and you understand Delta's this and Premier's this and Cigna's this, and this is literally your whole life, who's going to be better? The person that's multitasking in your office, trying to schedule and treatment plan and collect money and do recare and, also bill? I mean, even if they're just as good, they're delegating. They're just doing it all. Versus taking it out of the office and someone's just focused on billing. Who's going to be better? So third-party services make sense. It's why the DSOs are doing it, okay? My last 5 minutes here is all about marketing. So I look at marketing as not an SEO conversation, not a pay-per-click conversation, not a geofencing conversation, a print. Yeah, you guys know all those things, okay? There's external and there's internal. It's simple, right? External is very expensive, and it's easy to do because you just call someone up and they'll do it for you. It's just really expensive, easy to do. Internal is very inexpensive, but it's hard to do. It's the sponsorship booth at the Halloween spook festival with the little ones, right? It's asking for Google reviews and not expecting your swell software to do it for you. Asking people and having a conversation about that. Hey, how was your visit today? It was good, great. Well, tell me why. Oh, well, you guys did this and this. And, oh, that's different than other offices? Yeah, I never experienced that. Would you mind writing that? Because a lot of patients out there need to hear that because they're very scared of dentistry. And by you saying that, that might empower them to come in, make it about somebody else. Just that. Okay, hard. Asking people for referrals, doc referrals, doing drawings. It's just harder to do. But now we've identified what you could do. The question is, for a startup and an acquisition, because we talked about attrition. The guys talked about attrition, right? You're going to lose patients in acquisition. So you got to build the practice back up with new. And if you're a startup, my God, you really need marketing, right? So I look at marketing as a system where you get calls, and then the question is how many of those calls get picked up, and then of those calls that get picked up, how many converted to the schedule, and then when those people show up, did they accept treatment, and if they did accept treatment or they got their cleaning, did they reschedule, right? So how much of that are you in control of as the business owner? All of it except for the first call. So the first thing my clients say to me is, I want to do a print campaign, or I want to do an $8,000 social media campaign, or get all these. I was in some webinar and this guy was talking about geofencing. Okay, let's take a deep breath real quick. Let's look at your conversion rates. Let's look at your pre-appointment percentages. Because if you go and buy all these new patients, are they coming in the front door and out the back? Because I bet you they are. So most of those systems could be broke, right? And why go pay for new patients if we're not closing the back door, putting a padlock on that one, right? Are you with me? So I look at it from a whole system, not just how many calls did I get. There's plenty of marketing companies that can talk about how many calls I can get you, okay? So the average cost per new patient acquisition is $200 to $300. Remember that. If you're spending $500 for a new patient, your marketing's not working. If you're spending $100 per new patient, your marketing's really working. Do it again.
How do you get it qualified, though?
How do you track it? That's what this whole conversation is about.
They'll send you, I mean, I've seen.
Reports and touches and oh, I got you 18,000 impressions this month. That means nothing. Nothing. I think my next slide is track it, or it's in here somewhere. Track everything. Your front office has to ask, get different phone numbers, because you can get different phone numbers per campaign. Do different campaigns. Do a $25 gift card, a $100 gift card, a free whitening. Do all these different campaigns, and then you know which campaign's working. Because if I walk in and say I want the whitening, I know that that one worked. Your front office and your marketing campaign and you have to be dialed. And it can't just be on your new patient forms. If it's just on your new patient forms, they're going to write Google. What's that mean, Google? Did you Google me? Or did you find me on a postcard, then you Googled me? Right? Or did you see me on a Facebook post and then Googled me? Right? Or did I just say Google, because that's what I say to everything. So you got to get curious, and you have to track everything. And that's back to that marketing experience I had from Limited Brands. Limited Brands knows I had that account. I was a direct mailing company rep, and I did a lot of other things, but I did a lot of print for the Limited Brands. And I had the Victoria's Secret account. And they knew that when they sent you ladies a card, and you didn't take that one in, but you took in the next one, they knew exactly who you were, why you did that one. Then they would send you another one a week later that was a little different. And then they'd send you another one that was the same, and they would literally mess with you until they had you dialed. And when then they had you dialed, they hit you hard with it. And it's because they tracked everything. They figured out your buying patterns. They understood that you were interested in money or the product. Buy 3, get 5. Oh, that worked. Or just a $100 gift card worked for you. Like, they knew why and what you pressed. And that's the smart marketing people. Dentistry, you don't have to be that smart. Just track it and know what worked. That's the key. So thank you for asking that.
But,
yeah.
But the practitioner also has to have a little bit of knowledge so that they can vet the company that they're using.
They vet, but you still, in the end of the day, you have to try. And then track. Because you don't know if it's going to work. I always start my startups on a print campaign. And I know, because it's a different phone number, how many calls I got. We listen to every single one of those calls to see if it converted, okay? And then I can track it through production all the way down to production, which gets you this. And that's just print. If I did a pay-per-click campaign for a $50 new patient gift card and someone asked for that, I would track that. And I would know specifically how much I spent on print on that campaign, and then I would divide or figure out how much I invested in that campaign. Right? And I would be able to figure that out. But then keeping this conversation alive here, the value, I want at least $3 to $1 spent. That's the proper ROI. That's different than $200 to $300. So once I got them to call, that's that number. But then it's on you to figure out if you can produce when they hit your because you could get poor quality patients too. There's some ZocDoc type companies that offer really big gifts for new patients, and you might just be getting the wrong patients. That you're just getting, some. That's right. So I'm looking at that too. So it's not only the cost that I'm tracking, but I'm also looking at the production I got with that cost. Okay? I know it's a lot of tracking, but look, I just told you, 5% to 20%. To get the 20%, which is lights out amazing, you have to do these things. Treatment case presentation, and I'm hitting my spot. Oh, I'm a little bit over. Last thing I'm going to say, crap. Sorry, Foad, wherever you are. I'm 3 minutes over.
We're going to take a break
After this. Okay, perfect. This is like my favorite formula. Take a picture of this. It's not about new patients only. I have a startup that hit $1 million their first year. I'll give them that. Okay, he spent $150,000 in marketing his first year. He was aggressive, but he hit $1 million, so 10% in marketing. I mean, he could have made a lot more money. But the point is he was chasing 65 to 70 new patients a month. But I always bust him every single month because he has an accountability call with me. Every month I bust him because his pre-appointment rate is lower than the average. He's not keeping them in. They're going out the back door. So what's his actual patient growth when he gets 60 new patients? He might be losing 30 that same month to inactivity past 18 months. Marketing, because he's been open longer than 18 months. Are you with me so far? So this is the formula to figure out what your actual patient growth is. Because 30 new patients is great, but if 18 are status change, someone died, moved, or we haven't got them to schedule, they're not on the schedule, that's a negative, right? Another positive is patient recaptured. So someone that was 18 hasn't been on the schedule at all, we got them back on, that's a plus that month. So plus, plus, minus, minus equals new patient growth. Do you understand? That's huge, because if your new patient growth is negative 10, but you got 40 new patients that month, something's broke. And you're spending all this money on these guys, but you're not focusing here, right? Average new patient growth is 3% nationwide. So just a little tidbit. So think of marketing as a system that your team is accountable. Your marketing company is accountable to getting the calls, absolutely. And that's what he and I were kind of dialoguing on. Like, what's working? What 18,000 impressions? What's that really get you? I don't know. Like impressions? What's Facebook impressions? How many calls did I get? And then the rest is on the team, okay? All right, QR code. Here's the podcast. Start listening. This one's startup, obviously. This one's acquisition. Thank you so much for the time. I guess we're on a break. And sorry for going over. I had a lot of stats in there, so. All right, guys, thanks so much for having me.
All right, guys, I've been told that we need to start the second half of the game.
Go for it.
Awesome. So welcome everybody back. My name's Foad. I'm with Rome Commercial Real Estate. I'm a commercial real estate broker here. I'm based in the South Bay, but I support the peninsula all the way to San Francisco, South Bay, and we have partners in the East Bay and in Southern California, just in case you decide to open up an office down there. I wanted to thank Nakia, Jim, and the entire Dental Society for having us today. I love doing these events with the panel that we have today because it's going to add tremendous value to your day-to-day lives as business owners. So hopefully there's some nuggets that you've pulled from Michael's presentation, Forrest and CJ's presentation, and hoping I can build off of that, and going to pass off to Ali at the end, and hopefully we can tie this all in at the end. So for today, agenda-wise, I want to talk about how we're committed to helping doctors here. Oh, don't mind the Monterey Peninsula, that's a typo. We're going to talk about how we help our doctors here in San Mateo County. We're going to talk about the current real estate market. I know Forrest and CJ kind of talked about that, and interest rates, and are we in a recession? What's going on? And how we can use real estate to be practice owners and your own boss. And how can we use real estate to lower your overhead? Michael talked about, that cool pie chart with, your lease being almost 9 or 10%. How can we lower that even more? So we're a commercial real estate firm, and we specialize exclusively with helping dentists on the tenant and buyer side, meaning we don't represent anybody else but you in the transaction. We don't represent the landlord or the seller. So we have a fiduciary duty to you only in the transaction. We have about a combined 50 years of experience between all our agents and brokers on our team. So we all come from a dental background. So we know your industry really well. We know what to negotiate, what to look for in a transaction, and we also know the market. So we could, look for things to protect you throughout the process. And like I said, we never represent landlords or sellers, which removes any conflict of interest and ensures your interests are always protected. So what do? We help our clients identify and negotiate spaces for startups, acquisitions. So if you find that perfect practice for sale, well, guess what? There's typically two transactions that need to happen. The first transaction is the practice purchase. The second transaction is the lease negotiations. So that's where we come in to help you out. If you're looking to open up a second office, if you're looking to expand, if you're looking to buy a building, and lease renewal. So essentially, we're your unofficial real estate department for your business. And guess what? All this is free. You may have to pay Ali a retainer. You may have to pay Michael a retainer for their services, but our services are completely free. We only get paid when a deal closes by the landlord or the seller. So just like in residential real estate, where you hire an agent to help you find a house, you don't pay that agent. That agent gets paid by the other side, by the seller. Synonymous with commercial real estate. If you're looking at a lease space, the landlord pays our commission, or if you're looking to buy a building, the seller pays our commission and their agent. So current market conditions. Our clients' offices have thrived throughout the pandemic and have exceeded their projections. We've kind of touched about it briefly in the previous presentations. Just talking to our clients, the numbers have, surpassed year to year. Big question, obviously, that's looming right now is the overall economy. Is the market crashing? Are we in a recession? Are we going to see continued inflation? But the answer is here in the Bay Area. I'm talking just specifically here in the Bay Area because we're kind of in a bubble compared to the rest of the country, the rest of the state, right? We go outside the Bay Area, it's a different conversation. There are more opportunities here in coveted and retail and office spaces. We're seeing some turnover. Obviously, the work from home for the office world and tech world has opened up a lot of good space for our clients in these highly coveted buildings here in San Mateo County, down in Santa Clara County, San Francisco. I know you mentioned San Francisco. Definitely a lot of real estate available in San Francisco. Even in retail environments, someone talked about restaurants. Obviously, during the pandemic, a lot of highly visible restaurant spaces have become available for some of our owners. So due to the uncertainty in the overall economy, landlords are literally bending over backwards to retain you guys, good tenants, that will provide value to the buildings because they know the default rate because they know how secure dentists are and other healthcare providers are. Forrest and Michael mentioned what the default rate is, less than half a percentage. So they're literally bending over backwards to lure you into their buildings, to keep you, to retain you, if you're an existing tenant or if you want to be a new tenant in their buildings. They're offering concessions, discounted rates, tenant improvement dollars. So this is a really, really good time if you're thinking about doing a project or buying real estate, or even looking to open up a second office. We're still seeing. Just look down up and down El Camino Real. There's still a ton of projects being built, in these highly coveted spaces, and they're getting leased up or they're getting bought because, these are still, people want to be in the nice, spaces here in the Bay Area. If you're thinking you're going to wait for the interest rates to come down, you're going to miss the boat on securing those highly coveted spaces I talked to you before. Don't do that. I think Forrest mentioned it. Marry the property, but date the rate, right? Marry the property. You can date the rate. Rates fluctuate. We're still historically at an all-time low. But if there's a property in a location that's near your office that just came on the market for sale or for lease, and you're thinking about relocating, but you're on the fence because of rates, I would say jump on it, because if you don't, someone else will. And that's why you have to have that DSO type of mentality. I know the D word, the DSO word is the bad word, but you got to have that mentality because those guys are always looking for good locations that's going to drive business. So you got to have that type of mentality. First to market. And like I said, it's a great time to grow if you're looking to do a startup, purchase or acquisition. B of A has some incredible financing options. On the leasing side, 100% financing, even on the acquisition side, even on the purchase of the real estate. And again, the interest rates are still historically low. And remember CJ's graph where he went back to the beginning of time. When our parents bought a home 30 years ago compared to now, it's still historically low. So startups, is that what a startup looks like? Some shag green carpet, nice green couch, rocking chair in the waiting room to welcome you in, right? Nope, that's not what it looks like. That's what a startup looks like. This is actually one of our clients here in Redwood City. That's what a startup looks like. Beautiful design. So you can see it takes a team to build that, right? And it starts with the folks in the room. Obviously with your lender, connect with Bank of America if you're looking to do a startup or an acquisition. It starts with a good consultant like Michael, with a good attorney like Ali, and obviously the real estate. The common denominator between whether you're doing an acquisition or a startup. I forgot from the hands that were raised earlier, who is thinking about doing a startup? One. Who wants to buy a practice? Okay. Who's undecided? Okay. So the common denominator is the real estate, right? Common denominators, so you need a good real estate broker to kind of help you identify those locations and help negotiate on your behalf.
When's the best time to bring you on during that process?
So if you're doing an acquisition, my recommendation is after the letter of intent for the practice purchase is signed, because the lease negotiations unfortunately don't happen overnight. Some lease negotiations can take, as long as a month, when I'm brought in, because the landlord 99.9% of the time is a different person than the seller of that practice. So we have to go to a different entity. It could be a landlord based in Vermont. There's going to be back and forth, 2 to 3 rounds of negotiations, and that's when your attorney comes in to review the lease. So it could take up to a month. So I would say on the acquisition side, right when the LOI is signed for the purchase, please call me. And then on the startup side, if you're looking at a startup, the whole lease negotiation process, and I'll go through that later. I'll show you.
Can I ask you a quick question? So if you're buying a practice from someone who is maybe in the middle of their long-term lease, is that still a point where they would interact with you, or is that lease assignment just pretty straightforward?
Depends. If there's less than 2 years left on the lease, that's a perfect time to renegotiate. That's where I can help. But if there's more than 2 years, I would say it's probably best to assign the lease, but call me when the lease is coming up for expiration. I'll go through that later in my presentation. When your lease is about 18 to 24 months prior, a year to maybe 18 months, 24 months prior to expiration, give us a call and we can look at the lease and see where it fares against the market and maybe we can renegotiate better terms then.
I have a question. This may be a better question for Ali. If you, let's say you have 4 years or 5 years left on your lease and you sell your practice, and this person comes over and takes over the lease, whatever that means, and that person fails and defaults on the rent, as the seller, what can you do to protect yourself so you're not responsible for the new person failing, basically?
So almost everywhere in the country, the seller is able to get out of that lease, but not here in California. In California, the rules are, the landlords have really created an exception where almost in every scenario, I would say like 90% of the time, sellers remain on the lease until the end of that term. So if there's 5 years left, then you're on the hook for 5 years, and then after that you're not, if they stay. So which is one of the reasons why Fuad was saying less than 2 years. In an ideal scenario, you want to plan your exit, if possible, in the last 12 to 24 months of a lease, because it's really hard to make a dental practice fail in that amount of time, right? So if you're on the hook for 12 months, 18 months, you're probably going to be okay. And it gives the buyer a chance to negotiate with the landlord.
This is if the buyer takes over the lease. What if they come in and they renegotiate a brand new lease with their name on it, brand new terms?
The landlord will probably still put you on there. Most landlords don't want to renegotiate a new lease. They will do an assignment of the existing lease, which keeps you on the hook for the remainder of the term. But there's 10% of the time, I mean, not here, but if you're in Yolo County or in Sonoma County, where the fires were, I can probably get you out as a seller because landlords are so desperate, right? But San Francisco maybe right now, but even that's probably unlikely. Peninsula, South Bay, East Bay, forget it. Landlords know what they have in the tenants, so they won't let you go.
Yeah. Let me back up a bit. So we talked about the team, how important it is. So obviously having a good lender, having a good real estate broker like myself, we can help identify the locations, demographics, locations, all the lease negotiations. Dental attorney like Ali can help set up your corporate entity, partnership agreements, lease reviews, anything HR related. Ali can help. Obviously Michael can help analyze the practice purchase, help you with the practice management, all those things that he presented in his slide. Marketing, distribution, dental contractor, dental CPA, these are all, this is like your board of directors when you guys go into this venture, right? Because you need a team. Takes a village. So timeline, this goes back to your question. So finding a location can take anywhere up to a day to maybe a month. Someone wants to buy something on San Mateo Drive in San Mateo, those are, it's like Halley's Comet. That's for sale. They come up maybe once every couple of years. Very rare. So that's probably a longer timeline. But if you're looking for something for lease in San Mateo, definitely a lot more abundant than something to buy. And the negotiations, like I said, can take about a month. Lease review can take anywhere between, what Ali does, about 2 to 4 weeks. And then, as far as, if you're doing a startup, your contractor and your architect, it takes them about a month to actually do the design. And the construction can take a total 9 months. So that construction time, that encompasses the permitting for what your architect and contractor need to take into the planning department to submit, and the actual construction time. Any questions on the timeline? So acquisition, we talked about it. So after the letter of intent, I would say it's, your letter of intent negotiation probably takes about 2 to 4 weeks. The lease negotiation on my end can take about 2 to 4 weeks as well. And then I would say APA negotiations is about another 2 to 4 weeks. So in all, I would say give yourself some time to negotiate. If you're looking to buy a practice, I would say go in with the expectation that the lease negotiation is going to take about a month.
What's the APA?
Asset purchase agreement. That's when you buy a practice, a dental practice. So using real estate to lower your overhead. We know a lot of you are trying to save money definitely during these high inflation times and high cost times. Everything's more expensive. Labor costs, material, rent, right? Rent is almost 10%. With your lease, you have one chance every 5 to 10 years to negotiate, because typically a lease is either a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease. So it's really a great time to negotiate when it's that 12 to 24 month, that 2-year window. It's a good time to renegotiate your lease. And also gives you an idea of if you're thinking about relocating, maybe you need another bigger space, or maybe you want to buy a building at that point. Or if you're looking to sell your practice, in 12 to 24 months, that way we can renegotiate the terms to get you, lower overhead so it can be more marketable to a potential buyer. Leverage. So definitely give yourself enough time to renegotiate, because, like I said, the negotiation can take time. We can help you get you free rent. So that's one thing, like I said, landlords right now are literally bending over backwards to retain good tenants, and they're giving 1 to 2 to 3 months of free rent for your lease renewal. We've negotiated tenant improvement dollars for new floors and new paint. So if you're in an existing space that needs a little bit of TLC, definitely don't think that the landlord's not going to pay. They can, but obviously it comes with leverage and obviously good negotiation. And if you wait until the last minute, say, we just had a client call me, my lease is expiring in 4 months. Can you help me? Well, they really don't have that much leverage at that time. So give yourself enough time. And everything is negotiable, from the lease rate to the annual rent escalations, to the build-out period, especially if you're doing a startup, scratch startup, the tenant improvement allowance, the free rent period. We can get signage, we can get parking, exclusives. So everything is negotiable. Any questions? So we kind of talked about the timeline earlier. New lease takes about 9 to 12 months. Buying a building, 9 to 12 months. So what that means, 9 to 12 months, that's when, let's just say you close escrow or you sign the lease. It's going to take you about 9 to 12 months from beginning to ribbon cutting and your open house. That's typically how long it takes. Lease renewal, 12 to 24 months. Acquisition, 3 months. So kind of aligned to the timeline that I mentioned earlier. So here's a case study. I mean, it says lease renewal, but we could do it for startups as well. So this is a case study just recently that I renegotiated a lease for a client. They were in the space for close to 20 years, and every year they just exercise their option, not knowing that they could hire a real estate broker to represent them in the lease negotiations. We reviewed their lease and looked at it and saw that the landlord was significantly overpaying or overcharging our client, and we submitted an offer. We submitted an offer, and this is what they came back with. This is the final terms. So 1,500 square foot space. The landlord originally offered $4.17 per square foot. We were able to negotiate to $3.50. We saved them about $1,000 a month on the rent. We got them some tenant improvement allowance for new floors and new paint. so about $15,000. We got them 2 months of free rent. It was a 10-year lease. So over the course of 10 years, we were able to save them close to $150,000. And that's just by giving me a call and having them look at the lease. Had they not done this, it would have been obviously this side, this left column, nothing, and an above market rate. So definitely representation is critical. You're definitely allowed to have representation, and we'll talk about that in my later slide. For a startup, this is similar. If you guys are thinking about doing a scratch startup, this is very applicable. The tenant improvement dollars is going to be more. It's probably going to be closer to $50 a square foot on a brand new startup. The free rent period instead of 2 months is probably going to be close to 9 months or a year's worth of free rent. So that number down there is probably going to be, close to $200,000 worth of savings. Any questions on this slide?
Is that for some, is this an example of somebody in the Bay Area?
This is here in the Bay Area.
Okay.
Yeah, this is here.
And you did all of this for free is what you're saying?
No.
Free.
You get paid from the landlord?
I get paid by the landlord.
Now what if the landlord says, I don't want to deal with a broker? He deals with it.
That's my problem.
He deals with it.
No, that's my problem. We get resistance all the time. Oh, this is the tenant's my friend. I'm their patient. We go golfing on Sundays together, or we know each other from, our kids go to school together or whatever. That's fine. But business is business. We're here to represent you. We want to make sure our client gets the best deal possible. They have a right to have representation, just like how they have a right to have an attorney, just as they have a right to have a CPA look at their financials. That's how we have those conversations. So definitely contact us for a free lease evaluation for those existing practice owners. And we're happy to evaluate and strategize for you. So we're talking startups, acquisitions in today's meeting. So let's talk about the pros and cons to both. So location, 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 right? That's in real estate. That's the only thing that matters. Will we get immediate cash flow from an acquisition? Obviously, it depends. Without doing a deep dive and scrub of the financial documents, you won't know. Do the numbers add up? If we take the Delta Dental situation out, once the practice changes hands, there's going to be a loss of revenue. How does that affect the practice? Is it more attractive for you to buy? Remember, the default rate's the same, an acquisition versus startup. Still half, what was it, Forrest? Half, 0.3? 0.33. 0.33. So it's the same, whether it's an acquisition or a startup. You're inheriting someone else's practice versus building your dream practice. So, you're on a startup, obviously, you're designing yourself, you're hiring the people you want to hire, you're marketing it to the folks you want to market to, you're choosing the location where you want to be, you're instilling your own culture, your personnel. So there's a lot of pros to it. And again, like I mentioned earlier, representation is critical. To your question, sir, in the back, you mentioned, the landlord may be resistant. Well, the landlord has representation. Why can't you have representation, right? So definitely don't go with the mindset that, because the landlord said I can't bring in a broker, I can't. Well, that's what they're going to say. But they always have representation. They always have a team of people. Why can't you? Why can't you have a great attorney? Why can't you have a consultant to help you? But unfortunately, a lot of our doctors take the DIY approach, thinking that they can save money and negotiate their own leases or review their own leases together with their peers, comparing notes. Unfortunately, that's not the best way, because you're going to put yourself in a legal, unfortunate position and maybe leave a couple $100,000 on the table. So know the parties to a transaction. The folks that are driving by, you see a nice building for sale in San Mateo or Burlingame, that name on the building represents the landlord, not you. So remember that. Their fiduciary is to the landlord or the seller. They're only there to protect their interests, not your interests. So definitely have that mindset when you want to go into a real estate transaction. Commercial real estate is a lot more sophisticated than buying a house or buying a car. So don't take the DIY approach. So some misconceptions, hiring an agent will cost me money, not hiring an agent can save me some money, or my attorney can handle the real estate negotiations, or my residential agent can help me, or all commercial agents are the same. Well, these are unfortunately some of the misconceptions we're hearing in the market. Ali does a really good job of reviewing the legal aspects of the lease. My responsibility is to negotiate the best economics for the lease and setting up, making his job easier when he reviews the lease. So in closing, definitely hire professional representation. Give yourself enough time. If you're looking to buy a practice, or if you're looking to do a startup or buy a building, give yourself enough time. If you're an existing owner, look at your lease, see how much time is left, and we can help you kind of strategize the next steps. And that's about it. And let us know if you have any questions. That's my contact information. Feel free to call me, email, or text. If you guys have an existing lease, an existing owner, email it to me. Happy to take a look at your lease for free. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't want to reach over there. That would be an HR violation.
Big HR violation.
All right. Looks good. Sounds good. All good. All right. So I'm going to now tell you guys the truth of, and not all the stuff that they said, but the real stuff. Okay, you guys ready for that? Now, the one question I do have is, if you have to marry the property but date the rate, are you cheating on your property? I mean, let's think about that. Is that fair to the property? I don't know. I don't know. Says the guy who's not married. Is the only guy who uses that analogy, by the way, okay? The rest of us, we would never dare cheat on the property. All right. All right, here we go. So why this class? Why now? Well, something very interesting happened during COVID. A lot of you who were associates got terminated. Right? You got terminated on or around March 16th. And your employers closed their offices for 2 to 3 months, depending on how, risk averse they were. And, but what really happened was immediately after that, practice owners got a lot of money, right? They got PPP loans, they got donations from the government, they got a lot of stuff. Hence the reason we are in the situation we are now with high inflation and a lot of money being thrown around. What did associates get? Nothing. Associates got nothing, right? Zero. Maybe a little bit of unemployment, but nothing else. So as a business owner, those of you that own businesses here, including myself, great, yeah, the government's helping out. We're using that money, giving it back to our employees. We're buying new stuff. We're renovating the offices. But the employees, they, especially you associates, didn't get much of anything. So what's happened is that there's been a mind shift change where associates are now saying, I want to be a practice owner. I want all those same benefits that business owners got through COVID, I want to get now. Hopefully we never go through COVID again, but boy, there were a lot of benefits that came out of being a business owner, right? So, which is why we are seeing a huge influx of associates looking to become practice owners, right? They're in the market now. They're still associating, they're loving their life as associates, but they have their eye open on startups, on acquisitions, on other opportunities, because they know that the path to financial independence is through practice ownership. not associateship, right? The math does not work in your favor if you're going to work for someone else for the entirety of your career. It just doesn't. It doesn't mean that you have to try to get to financial independence as an associate. You can have a spouse, right? Your family may be very well off, but if you want to get it as an associate, as a dentist, you have to own your own practice, right? That's the reality of it. So that's why this class is super important. This is my family. Those of you who've come to these in the past years, you've seen the kids grow up. And so my wife's a pediatric dentist in the East Bay. So I not only sort of talk the talk because we've got thousands and thousands of clients, but because I live it, right? I live it with you every single day because everything she went through, you guys went through, including, trying to bring back the associates, trying to make sure that they're happy, making sure you're not firing staff members, which was, against a lot of advice. But those of you who heard me during COVID, one of the things I always said was, do not fire your staff, right? Well, those who didn't listen, right, are having trouble keeping staff now, right? Those who did have a little bit of a better chance. Why? Because people remember how you act during these kind of disasters, right? And so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about a lot of things really quickly, and then there's going to be a lot of time for us to kind of go into it later together. Okay, so first is the decision. We talked about this. There is no wrong decision in terms of practice ownership. Whether you do a startup, which I personally think is the best way to go, but that's just me doing 7,000 transactions, or you do an acquisition, right? Or you do an acquisition, which is, in some ways, looks and sounds safer, but it's not. Why is it not safer? You're buying cash flow. You're buying someone's practice. There's thousands of patients there. Why is buying someone's practice sometimes not safer? What do you guys think? I have all day. My kids are playing soccer already. So you guys, I'm here, so you guys tell me. What do you guys think?
There's some type of skeletons in the closet.
Yes! You don't know where the skeletons are buried, right? You don't know where the skeletons are buried. Now, I will tell you later how to find those skeletons, right? But most people who don't come to seminars like this, right, don't realize what they're doing. They go in and they think they're just buying patients and everything will be fine. But the skeletons are buried everywhere. You just don't know where, right? When you do a startup, it's your skeletons. You put them where you want, right? And so it's, as Fuad said, you can build a beautiful practice. You spend a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. The Bay Area is not cheap for construction, but then it's your baby, right? And you can build it as little or as slow or fast as you want. So there is no wrong decision. The only bad decision is not actually making a decision, right? Not making a decision and sticking with what you have because you're afraid of the economy. Yeah, economy sucks. My wife opened her practice, right? Opened her practice 2 months after the financial crisis in 2008. 2 months. Now, she is a pediatric dentist, so it's a little bit easier there, but still, right? There's a lot of clients we have who did that. Interest rates are high. Yeah, interest rates suck, right? They're 3 times what they were a year ago. 3 times, right? But who cares? Your cash flow as a dentist is so much higher that any interest rate right now could impact it, right? If you don't invest in yourself today, every year makes it harder and harder for you to build financial wealth. So the sooner you start, the better it is. Dentistry is such an incredible profession. Unfortunately, none of my kids want to go into it, but.
Not yet.
No. The first one's scared of blood. She takes after me. The second one wants to be a chef. And the third one wants to be a veterinarian working for a candy company. And so the third one, we have some hope, but I don't know. She might be like a dental vet, which would be like really kind of funny. But the reality is, right? The reality is that it's an incredible profession. It's recession-proof, right? It's pandemic-proof. And we are finding that it is inflation-proof. think about that, right? Recession proof? I've been through 4 recessions in my career in dentistry. Not once has dentistry been impacted. It just keeps on going, right? Now, if you have a fully cosmetic practice, yeah, you're going to be impacted. If you're an orthodontist, yeah, adult ortho is going to slow down. But, you know, everyone else is going to do fine, right? It's pandemic. We all, you know, for the most part, unless you're in downtown San Francisco, you did pretty well, right? You know, and so you have something to look forward to. Now, who knows what this is?
Tina Turner.
Tina Turner. Why did I put a picture of Tina Turner in here? Because I want it to be burned in your memories. There is no alternative to practice ownership, okay? So if you go home and you're like, I don't know if I want to be a practice owner, just think about Tina, right? There is no alternative. You guys, as dentists, you have to become a practice owner if you want to get to financial independence. It is the best way of making wealth, right? And doing what you love, right? Doing what you love. So let's jump into the legal basics now. Here's how this starts. The very first thing you do when you're buying a practice, and we're going to kind of jump back and forth between buying a practice and doing a startup, is the letter of intent. This is where the first mistakes can happen, okay? The letter of intent is a document that a seller or their broker gives to you, and then you negotiate the deal terms, the business terms, and if everyone's on the same page, then their lawyers, the seller's lawyer usually, starts putting together the contracts, okay? Which is after that, right? The asset purchase agreement, whatever. People make the mistake because brokers put you in a position to make a mistake, right? They say, just sign it. Just sign it. It's okay. There's 5 other buyers about to submit an offer. Sign this LOI. We'll deal with the details later. That's where the mistakes happen. Whatever is in the LOI gets transferred into the purchase contract. And there's no renegotiations, right? Whatever you put on there is what you live with, right? So you got to negotiate it. Now, I'm not saying negotiate hard on the price. You know, if you're buying a practice in Palo Alto, whatever they pretty much put on there that CJ and Forrest say is the price of the practice, you got to pretty much go 100% or like very close to it, because that's just the reality of the Bay Area market, right? But you've got to negotiate the letter of intent, right? There's other things like, which we'll talk about in a second, but there's things like covenant not to compete, things of that nature that need to be detailed. Once you negotiate it, then it goes to the asset purchase agreement. That's the major document where the practice transfers from the seller to you. There's exhibits, okay? For those of you who are potentially sellers in the room, the exhibits of an asset purchase agreement are super, super important for you, okay? Because that's where you list all the equipment, which is an easy thing to do. You list the employees and their benefits, easy to do. The most important thing for you sellers is you got to have something called continuing contracts. Continuing contracts are contracts that you have signed, that you're in the middle of, that you must transfer or you are transferring to the buyer, and you don't want to pay after you sold the practice. So, for example, one that's near and dear to my heart is if you're on HR for Health and you have a 12-month contract with them, once you sell the practice, you don't want to pay for HR for Health in retirement. You don't need it, right? You put HR for Health on that list, and then it transfers to the buyer, okay? If you don't put it on that list, you'll have to pay the rest of those contracts, so be very careful. A lease assignment, as we talked about a little bit earlier, landlords will give you lease assignments to sign that transfers the lease from the seller to the buyer. And then finally, if the seller's waiting to work back for you, there's an associate agreement. Okay, so if you're buying a practice, this is your world, okay, from beginning to end. And if you're selling, most of these apply to you too, of course. Okay, yes?
So is it legal for them to say sign the LOI before we give you the financials to look at?
Okay, great question. So what happens is a little bit counterintuitive in the purchase of dental practices. In most places, you would see the whole business details before you put in an offer. It's not like that in dental practices. What happens is that they give you a summary of the financials that the seller and the broker have kind of put together, and then you got to base your price on that data, okay? Now, That data may or may not be correct, but you got to base your price on that data, okay? You submit your LOI, and then we'll talk in a second about how to check all of that. Once you are in due diligence, which we'll talk about in a second, if something is different, like let's say they said they only have 25% Delta patients, but they actually have 50% Delta patients. Well, that's going to impact the price. Then you can go back and renegotiate the LOI, okay? But most sellers, unless they're doing it on their own and they're not very aware of what's happening, will not give you all the financials up front. They want to submit an offer, get an offer, they give you an NDA then, and then they will do the rest of it. Yes?
Why would that impact the price? Are you talking about Premier versus PPO?
Yes, yeah.
So if the practice is already a PPO participant, it won't impact the price.
It shouldn't impact the price in that situation. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. It's only if it's like a Premier-only practice, and the buyers now will, can't obviously get Premier anymore, so they're seeing 30 to 50% decline. So, okay. Restricted covenants. Remember we talked about this. I want to tell you guys about this because a little bit of a misnomer. So in California, it is completely illegal, okay, to have a restricted covenant, a covenant not to compete, in an employment agreement, okay? It's been compared to slavery, so there's no chance that this rule will ever change, okay? So in an employment agreement, when you are buying a practice, there is an exception. When you are buying a practice, you can restrict the seller from competing against you. That makes sense, right? If I'm buying a practice, I should be able to prevent the seller from walking down the street and opening up another practice. Like, that is just normal, good business. So the law allows that, okay? So what is the average? The average is from anywhere from 10, 15 to 25 miles. You don't want to go more than 25, and definitely not less than 10. My recommendations for you guys who are sellers, that are buyers, always start with 25 in your letters of intent, okay? Why? How many of you have pets? Let's start there. Wouldn't you drive 25 extra miles if your favorite veterinarian moved? You would, right? Well, imagine you're an adult and your dentist moves 20, 25 miles. Some people would go, some people won't, So 5, 10, 15 miles, that's ridiculous, right? People drive 5, 10, 15 just to charge their, cars or go to the grocery, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but so always start with 25, okay? Always start. So it's 25 miles radius as the crow flies, right? So it's a perfect radius for 5 years, okay? For 5 years. So don't change the 5 years at all. It's always 5 years. And then the range can change, okay?
Question.
Yes?
If this seller's son or daughter, the child is in dental school, can you include this non-competition clause to their kids?
No.
Because I was in this situation.
Yeah.
Where the dentist was retiring and I was going to buy him out, but his daughter, he was basically next door to me. His daughter was in dental school.
No, you cannot. The only person that can be restricted is the owner of a practice that then sells goodwill. Goodwill is actually the reason, right? Like if somebody sold you just assets, like they said, hey, I'm just selling you some chairs and the x-ray and a CAD cam. You can't have a non-compete against that person. They're not selling you goodwill, right? Goodwill is the trigger, but it has to be the owner of the practice. So their children, other associates, right? None of that, you can't restrict any of that. Yeah, great question. Great question. Okay, allocation of the purchase price. Did you have a question? Oh.
Yeah, what if you have multiple offices that are within a 25-mile radius and you're not going to sell all of them?
Then you carve out the other offices, right? There will be a lot more language for in that situation because there will be language that says we'll carve out, you can practice in these other locations, but you can't see any of these patients, right? And so, and if you do, you're gonna have to pay us for the value of those patients, right? So there's a little bit of that dance. It just gets a little bit complicated, but that's normal. There's always carve-outs.
Okay.
So, yeah, yes?
So should we contact you before we sign an LOI?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, 100%. An LOI is the first step, and it usually takes me a half an hour max to just review it and go through it with you. It's the best 1 hour that you will spend because that's where the problems start. I have young associates, unfortunately, who sign these LOIs with like 7, 8 mile radiuses, and then I get it and I go, no way. Like we go in and we negotiate, and the broker gets mad at me. Everyone gets mad because we're changing the deal terms. But there's no way, in good conscience, I can have you buy a practice where I know the person can drive. Like where we live in Danville, right? It's literally like 8 miles from one end of town to the other end of town. I mean, like, think about that, right? That's just like East Danville, West Danville. Like that's an incredibly short amount of space, right? And so here in San Mateo, it's the same thing. Like, that's like a 2-minute drive on the freeway, right? It's like, it's not a big deal. So you have to just negotiate, yeah. But right at the beginning, right when you're starting that. So, but I would say the first step is like, if you identify a practice, you get pre-approved, or once you make the decision, hey, I'm gonna buy a practice, you get pre-approved with a bank so that you know kind of what you're getting yourself into or what you can afford. And then you talk to us just to have us like on reserve. And then as soon as you find it, you can move forward quickly. Because these brokers want to know that you're not just window shopping. So it's important to tell them, hey, I have my team. I'm already pre-approved with Bank of America. I got Ali on my corner. I'm working with Mike. You may want to leave Mike out actually for a second. So just say Forrest and Ali, and then people will be like, okay, cool. All right, cool. Like they've got their team ready, right? They've got their team ready. And then once we get into due diligence, which I'll talk about in a second, that's when you bring Foad and Mike in, because then you're knee deep with them, right? So okay, purchase price allocation. So the IRS requires you as the buyer and the seller to notify the IRS how the purchase price is going to be allocated between 2 different kinds of assets. One is called tangible assets, and one is called intangible assets. Okay, so tangible assets are things that, as it sounds, you can put your hands on. They're tangible, right? Equipment, chairs, supplies, all that kind of stuff. Intangible are things you can't put your hands on. Goodwill, covenant not to compete. So let's do an example. Let's say you got $1 million practice that you're buying. The IRS says, okay, how do you divide this? You got to tell me, because I tax you differently based on this. So the average is 80% of the purchase price. Okay, you guys should be writing this down. 80% of the purchase price goes to intangibles. 20% goes to tangibles. Okay, that's how the average is. If a seller gets really aggressive, they can go as aggressive as 90% intangible, 10% tangible. Pro tip, never, ever, ever allow the seller to go more aggressive than 90-10, okay? In my 20 years and 7,000 plus transactions, I can tell you, I guarantee you or the seller will get audited if you go more than 90-10, okay? The only times in my career where my buyers or sellers in the transaction got audited is when one of them went more, well, they have to do it together, but they went more aggressive than 90-10. So don't even get close to it. Do 91, do 89-11. You know what I mean? Like even like 1%, just in case you have a rounding error, right? Just don't get too crazy with it. But for you as a buyer, guys, it doesn't matter what the percentage is as long as it's not worse than 90-10, okay? Because you don't want to get audited. Yes.
What includes intangible, like patient?
It could be patient charts. It's usually goodwill, covenant not to compete, and the charts. Your CPA will figure these percentages out, but the one major thing is there's almost no tax impact on you what these percentages are. Just make sure it's not more aggressive than 90-10. If I'm working with you, I will for sure be looking for that, but I just want you guys to be looking at it, okay? Just in case you decide to go somewhere else, which would be crazy. But
Marginally affects your
yeah, super small. Well, here's the thing.
unsecured property tax, because that tangible asset comes to that. And then
Yeah, well, that would be to your benefit. Yeah, that would be to your benefit as a buyer. The reason there's a difference is that the tangible assets depreciate faster than intangible, but it's like these CPAs kind of make work for themselves because the reality is that you're going to hopefully make more money in the future. So every dollar of depreciable asset that you can have is actually worth more in the future than it is today, right? Because if you're making $500,000 more in 5 years or 7 years, I want you to have more depreciation then than today because it's not going to impact you as much. So anyhow, don't worry about the percentages. Just make sure it's not more than 90-10, okay? That's key. Okay, accounts receivable, you have a couple of options. Either you collect it for the seller, okay, for anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and the seller will pay you 5%. Okay, now, any orthodontists in here? Okay, so for the rest of you, you just have to worry about accounts receivable, which is monies owed to you, or owed to the seller, I should say, for work that the seller has finished. If you have an ortho practice, or if you have a lot of Invisalign in the practice you're buying, you will also have something called contracts receivables. Contracts receivables are for active treatment, right? Where it's, you got a 24-month payment plan, small deposit up front. That's contract receivables. That's very different than accounts receivables, okay? So that's the first way is you buy you collect it for the seller for 3 to 6 months, and they pay you 5% for doing the work that you're doing, right? Collecting it for them. The other option is you can buy the AR. Now, I personally don't like my clients buying the AR, but Mike is convincing me slowly but surely that in certain situations, as a buyer, it's better and easier for you if you buy the AR. My only recommendation is that it's a case-by-case basis, so just take a look at it. But if you got to make sure you're getting a really strong discount in order to buy AR. Forrest and CJ will give you more money, right, to buy the AR most likely, so don't worry about that. But you got to make sure it's at a discount, right? Because if their collection practices are bad, you're losing money on it, right? So we won't go into this much more detail today, but just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, lease. What's that?
The great debate.
The great debate. Yeah. But you're convincing me. Okay, lease negotiations. Lease negotiations. So Foad does a fantastic job of this when you're doing a startup. In fact, their entire team at Rome has done things that I sometimes just, it blows me away because they're able to get more money from landlords than I have ever seen any other broker do, right? And so if you're doing a startup, you gotta work with a commercial broker that understands medical, that can help you negotiate with these landlords, right? And you wanna do it up front because when these landlords go to landlord school, right, they are told, right, 1,001 ways to take advantage of you, right? 1,001 ways. And so you need to start off on the right foot. And there's a whole letter of intent kind of component to that he will do. I will take a quick look at it right before you sign it. Then it goes to the lease and I do the rest, okay? The only thing I want to remind you guys with regard to leases, because this is kind of like the top 6 items that you have to kind of think about. We're not going to go through them today, is the types of leases that are out there, okay? There are really 2 types of leases that you guys really need to know. There's really 3, but there's 2 that we'll talk about, okay? One is called a full service lease, okay? It's the best kind of lease you can have. the best kind of lease you can have. You pay your rent and you pay for nothing else. Life is good, right? That's all. You just pay your rent and you go home, right? It's the best kind of lease. If it's the best kind of lease for you, who is it bad for? Landlords. That's why it's the least common lease out there, okay? The only places that you can find a full-service lease these days in California is an office building with lawyers and CPAs and other people, okay? Not a medical dental building. That will all be triple net. And triple net is N, okay? It goes by that moniker. So it'll say something like $3 a square foot, N. When you see those three N's, it means it's triple net. And triple net is the worst kind of lease you can have. By far the worst. And the most common, right? The most common. Why? Because it's in every dental medical building, every shopping center, every retail center, every strip mall, every other kind of building other than a general office building with lawyers and CPAs and, you know, other people. That's what it is, right? It's a triple net. Now, why is it bad? It's bad because you pay your rent and then you pay your fair share of every other expense out there. So you pay your fair share of that light bulb that they change, the roof, the parking lot, the elevator. You pay your fair share of every expense the landlord has, with the worst one being property tax, right? So you could pay $3 a foot, but you could have a whole other dollar a foot of triple net. This is what a lot of young doctors who are either starting a practice from scratch or buying one forget, right? Is that you got to know what kind of lease you have, right? And Foad will tell you if you're doing a startup, or if I'm doing a transition for you, we will tell you what kind of lease. But you got to put all of this in your budget and planning. Yeah.
Because with the triple, and correct me if I'm wrong, but with the triple net lease, like over time, it's increasing, where the full service is set for the whole term. Is that right?
Not quite. Yeah. They both will go up in terms of rate, right? Like 3% every year in terms of the lease. But I think what you're referring to is the expense portion goes up even more on a triple net lease, because if electricity goes up, did you guys see what PG&E did 2 days ago? You guys see that? They asked the insurance commissioner for a 23% hike in energy costs. 23% energy hike to pay for all these wildfire lawsuits and all this other junk that they did. 23%, right? Well, if your commercial building is a triple net building, you're paying your fair share of that 23%. If the building sells, which a lot of you here in the peninsula are going through, because Fuad and I talk about this, the reason landlords here in the peninsula are a little bit more difficult with you is because Google and Facebook and Apple and all these have secret LLCs buying land all over the peninsula and the South Bay, and they're doing it for redevelopment, right? So what happens? A landlord sells, right? The property tax goes up to fair market value, and a triple net lease, who's paying that? You guys are paying it, right? It's the worst kind of lease. Now, that being said, it just means you have to negotiate harder. You need more professionals like Fuad on the leasing side to help you negotiate. Because typically, rent for triple net is a little bit lower, right? A little bit lower. But they try not to make it lower, right? But you need to negotiate hard. Like, you need to negotiate real hard, okay? And then you're in good shape, okay? Okay, ignoring HR. HR is your worst enemy, okay? It is the reason you will get sued, God forbid, one day in practice. It's not from patients. The likelihood of you doing something wrong on a patient, except if you're an oral surgeon, is very low, okay? All right, so don't worry about that, okay? But HR is your biggest enemy, right? Public enemy number one. HR lawsuits have outpaced malpractice across the board for many, many years in dental, okay? So, what do you have to know? Here's what you have to know. You need 12 to 20 documents here in California for every employee that you have, okay? So when you are buying your practice or you're starting from scratch, you got to make sure that every one of your employees has all of these documents, okay? This is the baseline, right? Baseline of HR compliance. And if you go to a payroll company, they will give you 5 of these documents, right? If you go to an out-of-state company that does employment manuals for you, they will give you like 4 of these documents, right? Like you got to focus your attention on these HR stuff because it is by far the most important thing. For those of you who are getting in practice, for those of you who are retiring, it's a deadly killer because what people don't talk about is that there's a 3 to 4 year statute of limitations for HR violations. What that means is that if you sell your practice, your staff has 3 to 4 years to come back and sue you. Okay? So what we're seeing and what we're trying to fight with the help of CDA is minimizing that for our sellers. Because what's happening is that people are retiring with a nest egg, and then they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees and settlement. Because what happens when one person sues and they get some money? Other people come, right? The whole team. Because remember, you're not the boss anymore. They have no loyalty to you. They don't have to laugh at your jokes. They don't have to tell you how cute your kids are, right? Like, they don't care about any of that anymore. They've got a new boss, and they see you as having retired, and so then they come after you, right? That's why you got to get HR compliant, right? And the average settlement of lawsuits is 1 to 2 times someone's annual salary. So if you think about that for a second, right? If someone's making $25 an hour, that's $50K a year roughly in salary, their average settlement for that person is $50 to $100K. That's without legal fees, lawyers, courts, it's just the settlement that goes to them, right? So imagine 50K times, or 100K times 5 employees, 6 employees, 10 employees, right? I mean, I'm telling you, it's a big thing. So HR for Health is our sister company that we recommend you use for this. Super cheap. If you're a CDA member, which I know you are because you're here, you will get discounts up and left and right and upside down because you're a member. So take advantage of that when you're starting out, right? It's the best investment you can have. Yeah. HR for Health.
Employment liability insurance that we carry, some of us.
Yes.
Does that have a tail just like your malpractice?
So it depends. If you have TDICs, yes. If you have others, probably not. Okay, probably not. Now, so actually, thank you for bringing this up. So there's an insurance you can buy called EPLI, Employment Practices Litigation Insurance, okay? Usually, this is like super expensive and unnecessary, especially if you have HR for Health. However, if you have your insurance with TDIC, I highly recommend when you're buying a practice, because you get one chance to do this, and then you have to wait an entire year to do it again, okay? There's, on the application you fill out, there's like a little box. Like it's really little, right? And it says EPLI. It says Employment Practices Litigation. It might say liability insurance, but anyways, it's the same thing. If you don't check that box, you don't get that insurance. It's like the best deal on earth. It's like $500-600, and you get $100,000 of coverage in case you get sued by an employee. Every single time they sue you, right? So you want that just in case. And I have some people that say, well, Ali, if I have that insurance, why do I need HR for Health? And I say to that person, if you have fire insurance, do you burn down your house? Right? Right? If you have life insurance, do you kill yourself? I mean, hopefully not. Right? Like, you just don't. You have to have the insurance just in case you find someone that goes nuts on you. Yes, you had a question.
Oh, you said that we can only do it once a year?
Yes, yes. So you can apply for it right when you buy a practice, and you get all the liability insurances. And then if you don't get it then, you have to wait until July of every year. Okay? So if you don't get it, and God forbid you get sued in the middle of the year, you don't get it, right? You have to wait, right? So make sure, guys, you get that, right? Usually there's a TDIC person here, but they're not here because it's Saturday. So it's trust me when I tell you, this is a really good thing, right? It's a really good thing. Okay, here's some of the required forms. I won't go through all of these. The sexual harassment information sheet, we've kind of forgotten about the Me Too movement, right? Because like COVID happened. But Me Too is still a problem, of course. So if you're planning on sexually harassing your employees, don't give them that form. Okay? All right, I'm kidding. Don't sexually harass anyone. Give them these forms. But you need all of these forms, okay? You need all of these forms. And this is just some of the 12 to 20 that we were talking about. Okay, now let's get into figuring out the skeletons before we end. So there's 3 types of due diligences. There's financial due diligence. Okay, by the way, due diligence, for those of you that don't know, is basically a fancy word for you got to do your homework on the practice you're buying. Okay, it's the homework on the practice that you're buying. Okay, so you must do this. Financial due diligence, that's the bank and the CPA reviewing all the tax returns and whatnot. Now the reason, CJ mentioned this, but you guys may have missed it because he said it pretty quickly. The reason you want to go with a dental lender, right, is not because the word dental is in front of lender, okay? Because there's a lot of that going on, right? There's a lot of people that say, oh, I'm a dental lender. No. The reason you want to go with one of the top dental lenders is because if they see anything in your financials of the practice you're buying that seems odd, they're going to raise their hand and say, why is this happening? Right? Why is this happening? Right? Like if there's a $1.5 million practice and they have very little supply costs, why is this happening? You're not going to notice, but maybe there's a second practice somewhere where they're funneling expenses through that, pretending like this one's more profitable, right? Right? Who's going to notice? A dental CPA and the dental bank, right? They will let you know about that, okay? So it's really important that you go with, one of the top ones. Obviously, B of A's here, they're endorsed by CDA, but just keep an eye on that, okay? Hugely important. So your CPA and your lender. The second one is legal due diligence. That's my part, okay? I review the lease, the purchase contract, I set up your corporation, I help you hire your employees, all the legal stuff that we've been talking about, that's my part, I do that. The third one is one that you rarely hear people talking about, but we started talking about this years ago, and it's become more of a movement, and people used to never do this. This is what I call practice management due diligence. Okay, so I haven't figured out a better word for it, but it's basically, this is where Mike comes into play, okay? Because what he will do is he will look at the practice and tell you how it's doing from a practice perspective, right? He's not looking at the tax returns. He's looking at what's the ages of the patients, right? Is the seller watching a lot of things, or is he doing every piece of dentistry that there is? Because you need to know that, right? Is he or she accepting copays, right? Are they accepting copays? I can't tell you how many practices we walk away from because the seller doesn't accept copays, right? There's just a lot of data that you need to know, and that's where Mike's value truly is, right? He's going to tell you all the good. Now, what's the difference between a good practice management consultant that does this and one that's not so good, okay? I'll tell you why. The secret question that you got to ask, right, and that, I can tell you Mike does this already, but if you end up talking to other people, is whether or not, or let me rephrase that. You want to have someone whose analysis for you doesn't just tell you what's wrong with a practice. You want them to tell you how to fix it, right? See, a lot of people will do this for free, right? And they'll give you a report and they'll be like, here's all the things that are wrong with the practice. Hire me, right? No. I'm paying you to tell me what's wrong with it and to tell me how do I fix it, right? That's a good report because then you have that report and you can say, okay, I'm going to do it myself, or okay, I'm going to hire Mike or someone to do it. Does that make sense? Like, you need to know how to fix things as well, right? Right? So just kind of keep that in mind, because if it's just given to you, it's usually not as good as if you spend a couple $1,000, right? It's money well spent. But do not skip this, because remember what Forrest and CJ said, less than 1% of practices fail, right? I don't know the percentage, but I can tell you a much bigger percentage are hurting, right? Right? They don't talk about the practices that hurt. They might not fail, but man, they're hurting. And do you guys want to hurt? I don't want you to hurt. I hate when my clients hurt, and very few of them do. And the reason very few of them do is not because they're necessarily the best dentist ever, right? That's not the reason. You guys are all highly trained dentists. It's because you're not making mistakes in buying your practice, right? You're not buying a practice that doesn't have, that the seller doesn't accept copays, because you know at the moment you walk in, all those patients are walking to the next dentist who doesn't accept copays, right? Guys, it's about risk minimization, not elimination. Does that make sense? Right? You cannot eliminate HR risks. You cannot eliminate business risk. But if you don't do these 3 due diligences, you have a much higher risk profile, right? And I will urge you, if you work with me, I will be urging you strongly to do all 3 of these, because it's money well spent, right? The bank will do it for free because that's their job. The CPA charges like maybe $1,500, $2,000 to do theirs, easy. I charge more, but that's me. And then there's practice management due diligence, and they're charging like $2,000, $2,500, right? Right? Like most of your costs are on the legal side because there's just more work for us to do. But a practice management consultant, you know, if they're good, they know what they're looking for, right? So don't, you know, it's good money spent. Okay. All right. Final things, incorporation. Please incorporate. I'll leave it at that, because you have liability protection. If God forbid you get sued for anything, they can't come after you except for malpractice, but that's why you have malpractice insurance. You get a ton of tax benefits, a ton of tax benefits. You get to write things off that you never knew you could write off. And because of the way the IRS is structured, and because they don't have much funding, your chance of getting audited as an S corporation is super, super, super low, right? Like really low. If you're a C Corp or your LLC, which you can't be here in California for a doctor anyways, it's much higher, okay? Much higher. But the final secret benefit, the one that no one will tell you about, but I will tell you because you're here today on a Saturday, is that if you set up your corporation before you sign the loan paperwork that Forrest or CJ will give you, that loan will appear nowhere on your credit. Nowhere on your credit. And this is something unique with only a few of the dental banks. US Bank, for example, will not do that. Not only will they put it on your credit, right, even if you do have a corporation and stuff, but they'll try to put liens on all your personal assets and all that kind of nonsense as well. So good luck going to refi that house. I mean, don't refi now because interest rates are stupid. But if they fall and you refi, that's what you know. So be smart about this, right? This is a huge benefit, because imagine this, right? You have a practice now, you have a loan for it, but it's not on your credit. So when you go to buy a house or a second house or whatever, it looks like you have clean credit. Right? You just have your student loans. So you should always try to buy your practice first and then a house, right? Don't buy a house first, because we can't hide the mortgage of the house. But you can hide.
How can you hide it?
Because you're doing it under the corporation. So the corporation is its own legal entity. But if you sign that loan paperwork that he gives you, right, before you have your corporation, right? Not the application, not the underwriting, not all of that. That stuff is all under your name. But at the very end, when they're like, okay, we got to give you the money, the practice is closing, you got to sign and give us a check maybe, that you don't want to do under your name. The final loan documents have to be under your corporation name.
So do we make the corporation first before we?
No, you start the process with him. You start the whole process with him, and then as we get closer to buying the practice, like towards the end, we'll incorporate you. Yeah. Okay? All right, so here's the moment of truth as we end. What are you going to do next? Right? This is the magic question. Because you've been here, you've heard, you've hopefully gotten to eat something. I mean, Forrest ate almost all the food, but hopefully you got something out there. If you did, good for you. But what are you going to do after you leave? Are you going to just enjoy another beautiful day in the Bay Area? Or are you going to take a moment before you leave today, not to fill out the surveys first, but to write down 3 things that you learned? Not just from me, but from all of us. What are 3 things that just have sort of popped in your mind as you are writing these things down? It could be anything, right? And the reason these 3 things are important is because it's going to start the process of you taking action to buy your first. And it might be, hey, I found a practice. I don't want to tell anybody. I got to get approved, right? Great. Write that down right now, right? So that on Monday, you don't forget and you contact CJ or Forrest. Or it might be, hey, I'm going to do a startup. I need help finding a place. Fuad, find me one of your secret places that nobody knows about, right? Like just sending an email, right? So that could be one thing. The second thing is just a second thing that you learned today that you want to do that you think is crucial, right? And then write a third thing, right? So just take a moment, write 3 things that you really have learned that are stuck out to you, because that's the universe telling you those 3 things are important. And then you can not forget them after you have a great weekend. So here are, and those 3 things you'll do in 7 days, and 14 days, and in 21 days. And it's incredible how this will cause other things. I've written a white paper for you guys if you want to. If you want some more information in a little bit more detail about how to buy a practice or start up, just take a picture of either one of those, and then you can put your email. And if you want, just do one of them, and then just email me that you want the other one, and we'll just email it to you. And then you can have this in your email if you have not been taking notes, because there's a lot of good information in those white papers. But of course, you have access to me as part of the Dental Society, and here's my email and phone number, and please reach out anytime. You guys, we love this Dental Society for a lot of different reasons, and so we're always giving with our time here. So don't ever feel like you're alone. Okay, all right. So that's all for me. You guys want to come up and thank you. And we can stay for as long as you guys need. If you guys have questions, yes.
If we're in a position where we plan on acquiring or starting a practice anytime soon, is there still a benefit in working with someone like you, a dental attorney, as an associate?
No, probably not, unless you receive like a new contract from an employer. Right? Like if you're working with a group practice or you're changing jobs, then I would want to just take a look at the contract really quickly, just to make sure there's nothing in there that prevents you from opening your own one day, right? But at that moment, probably not.
Okay, so if you're in the position of going to sign some contracts as a new associate, which would be...
Thank you.
Good questions at the end.
Yeah, really good.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming out on a Saturday. Thank you to our dream team, Forrest, Foad, Ali, and Michael, and CJ. Feel free to contact them directly, or you can contact the Dental Society, and we will be happy to make those referrals for you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.